Good evening, and welcome to The Sleepy Scientist. Tonight we'll be drifting far back through time, to an age when reptiles ruled the world. Before mammals dreamed or flowers bloomed, the Earth belonged to creatures scaled, soaring, and immense. This is a calm journey through deep time, perfect for listening as you unwind or gently drift towards sleep. As we begin, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Your city, your country, perhaps even what the night sky looks like outside your window. And if you enjoy these peaceful explorations of science, please do take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It truly helps this little corner of quiet curiosity grow. To those already subscribed, thank you sincerely for being part of this slow and thoughtful adventure, and do click the notification bell so you won't miss the next time we wander through space or history together. And, well, I hope this video isn't too interesting that it keeps you awake, but if it does, at least you'll fall asleep a little wiser. So let's settle in, breathe softly, and drift backward, hundreds of millions of years, to a world ruled by scales and sunlight. What was it really like when reptiles reigned supreme? To understand the age of reptiles, we first have to step outside the human sense of time. Our minds are tuned to lifetimes, to seasons, to days. But the story of this era unfolds across spans so vast that even mountains seem to come and go like weather. The age of reptiles, more formally known as the Mesozoic era, stretches across nearly 180 million years, from the opening warmth of the Triassic to the quiet dusk of the Cretaceous. During this immense chapter of Earth's story, the planet was both alien and familiar. The continents were joined together in a single vast landmass called Pangaea, fringed by endless coastlines and scorched by wide deserts. Over time, the supercontinent cracked and drifted apart, giving rise to the shapes of the modern world. The climate was warmer, the poles were free of ice, and forests of conifers and cycads painted the land in shades of green that shimmered beneath a thicker, heavier atmosphere. The title Age of Reptiles can sound misleading, because this was not a single empire under one kind of creature, it was a chorus of many. On land, dinosaurs evolved into an astonishing range of forms, horned, crested, armoured, and feathered. In the seas, ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs prowled beneath rolling waves, and in the skies, pterosaurs stretched their delicate wings across entire valleys. Life diversified in every direction, filling the planet with new designs and possibilities. Scientists read this distant world through the patient language of rock. Each layer of sediment is a page in a slow-moving diary, written in ash, clay, and calcium. Radiometric clocks count the quiet decay of elements. Fossils become bookmarks marking the rhythm of ancient lives. Through these traces we can reconstruct the warmth, the storms, and the migrations that once rippled across deep time. What makes this story especially beautiful is its balance between order and upheaval. Extinctions cleared the stage, only for life to rush back in new and unexpected forms. From catastrophe came creativity. From scarcity came adaptation. The Age of Reptiles was not just a reign, it was a long experiment in resilience, where evolution tested every imaginable blueprint for survival. Tonight, we'll drift through that story, across continents that breathe and split apart, through oceans that once shimmered with reptilian giants, and under skies patrolled by creatures lighter than bone. Each step will reveal another layer of the Mesozoic, from its volcanic beginnings to its final twilight under a falling star. When you try to imagine deep time, it slips through your fingers like water. A human lifetime, perhaps 80 or 90 years, barely stirs the dust. Civilizations rise and crumble in the blink of a geological eye. Even all of recorded history is only a film of ink atop a mountain of stone. To understand the Age of Reptiles, we must first learn to stretch the imagination until 1 million years feels like a heartbeat, and a continent's drift like the ticking of a slow, patient clock. Geologists divide the Earth's history into nested boxes of time: eons, eras, periods, epochs, and ages. These divisions are not arbitrary but marked by transitions written into the rocks, mass extinctions, shifts in climate, chemical changes in oceans, or the sudden appearance of new kinds of fossils. It is a practical way of mapping the immeasurable. The Mesozoic era, which we call the Age of Reptiles, sits comfortably between the Paleozoic that came before and the Cenozoic that followed. It spans nearly 180 million years, from roughly 252 million to 66 million years ago. A stretch of time so long that mountains could rise, erode, and rise again before the era was done. Measuring such vastness demands extraordinary tools. Radiometric dating allows scientists to read time written into the atoms themselves. Certain elements, like uranium, decay into lead at a steady, predictable rate. By measuring the proportion of parent to daughter atoms in a crystal, geologists can determine how many millions of years have passed since that mineral last cooled from molten rock. Other methods use potassium turning into argon, or rubidium into strontium, each with its own half-life suited to different ages. The beauty of the method lies in its cross-checking. When multiple clocks agree, confidence grows that the story is true. Every volcanic layer becomes timestamp, every grain of zircon a tiny ticking chronometer. But rocks also carry another kind of calendar, the language of life. Some fossils are so widespread and so brief in their existence that they serve as perfect bookmarks in the geological library. These are known as index fossils. A particular ammonite or microscopic foraminifera species might have lived only for a few 100,000 years, but scattered its remains across half the globe. When you find that same fossil in different rocks, you know those layers were laid down at roughly the same time no matter how far apart they are today. It's as if Earth left matching signatures across its archives, waiting for us to connect the pages. Once you learn to read rocks, landscapes begin to talk. Tilted sandstone layers record ancient river channels. Each grain once rolled along a Triassic streambed. Ripple marks, cross-bedding, and mud cracks whisper of vanished shorelines. Dunes frozen in stone show wind patterns from deserts long turned to fertile fields. Limestone layers, smooth and pale, tell of shallow seas teeming with shellfish beneath warm tropical skies. Geologists call these shifting environments facies, each one a mood of the planet captured mid-breath. Over millions of years, rivers wander, seas advance and retreat, and sediments stack like the pages of a vast unhurried novel. Of course, Earth's diary has gaps. The fossil record is famously biased. Soft-bodied creatures decay before they can leave a trace. Entire forests might vanish without a single preserved leaf. Even when bones or shells do fossilize, erosion and subduction can destroy them again, recycling history back into molten silence. What we hold in museums are the survivors of chance, the rare lucky moments when chemistry and circumstance conspired to preserve something delicate against impossible odds. Knowing this helps us read the record with humility. Every fossil we see represents countless others lost forever, and yet the fragments we do find are enough to outline the grand rhythm of life. At the dawn of the Mesozoic, the continents were fused together into one immense landmass, Pangaea. Imagine a single supercontinent stretching almost from pole to pole, ringed by a global ocean. Its interior was vast and arid, a sea of red deserts baked beneath relentless sun. Along the coasts, warm monsoons swept in, feeding conifer forests and cycads. The geography of this giant continent sculpted the wind itself, air rising from scorching interiors, rain falling only on narrow edges. Over millions of years, Pangaea would crack and drift apart, But in the beginning, it was a single canvas on which evolution could experiment. The Earth's pulse is measured not just in the rise and fall of continents, but in the rhythm of extinction and recovery. The boundary that marks the start of the Mesozoic is also a scar, the greatest mass extinction in the planet's history, when around 90% of marine species and 70% of land species vanished. From that silence, life slowly rebuilt itself, testing new designs and new strategies. Each extinction that followed would act as punctuation in this long story, breaking and resetting the grammar of evolution, and from each pause life found a new melody to play. When we zoom out far enough, deep time feels almost calm. Mountains fold like paper, oceans open and close, creatures evolve and fade with the steady tempo of geology. Yet within that calm are the details, the flicker of a ripple, the path of a stream, the delicate hinge of a shell that make the story intimate. The age of reptiles was vast, yes, but it was also immediate, filled with the same physical laws that shape our own days: wind, sunlight, water, and breath. So as you picture this era, let your thoughts slow until 1,000,000 years feels like a single exhale. The rocks beneath our feet are older than memory, yet they carry the same ingredients we know: minerals, gases, light, and time. They remind us that everything changes, but nothing truly disappears. The stones themselves are the planet's heartbeat, still ticking softly beneath the soil, marking the passage from chaos to order, from emptiness to life. If you could stand on Earth 230 million years ago, you might not recognize it as home. The air would feel heavier, the sun a little warmer, the landscape vast and unbroken. Great deserts stretched across the heart of the supercontinent Pangaea, painted in deep reds and oranges by iron-rich dust. Yet along the coasts, where monsoon rains met the land, forests of conifers and ginkgos thrived, and rivers carved green corridors through the dryness. The Triassic world was a planet of extremes, arid interiors and humid edges, searing days and cool nights, drought followed by sudden flooding rains. This constant contrast became an engine for evolution. Life learned to be flexible, to take chances, and to fill every possible niche that water and sunlight could reach. Among the survivors of the great Permian extinction were the archosaurs, an ambitious family of reptiles destined to shape the next era. Archosaurs were diverse, including early crocodile relatives, pterosaurs, and the ancestors of dinosaurs. Their name means ruling reptiles, and though they began small and scattered, their body plans carried the seeds of future dominance. One of the most important differences between these groups was hidden in their ankles. It might sound humble, but ankles determine destiny. The crocline archosaurs with sprawling joints moved close to the ground, powerful but limited in speed. The dino line developed a more upright stance, with straight limbs placed beneath the body, allowing them to move lightly and efficiently. This small anatomical tweak unlocked a whole new way of living: running, chasing, and conserving energy. Evolution, as always, found greatness in small adjustments. Early dinosaurs were not the towering giants of the Jurassic yet to come. They were modest creatures, some no larger than a dog, others the size of a horse. Names like Euraptor and Herrerasaurus belong to these first experimenters in the dinosaur design. They were quick-footed, long-tailed, lightly built animals, most likely omnivorous opportunists who darted through ferns and along dry riverbeds in search of insects, lizards, or fallen fruit. They lived in a world still dominated by other reptiles: Rauisuchians, etosaurs, and early crocodilian cousins. For millions of years, dinosaurs were the background players in an already busy stage play, surviving on the edges until the script changed in their favour. The Triassic landscape itself was raw and restless. Volcanic plains stretched between mountain chains. Floodplains baked and cracked in the sun. then came alive when the rains returned. Plants dictated the structure of life's communities. Tall conifers formed the backbone of forests, their resin-scented needles whispering in hot winds. Beneath them, cycads and ginkgos added texture, their tough, waxy leaves built to resist dryness. The ground layer was sparse, low ferns and seed ferns, but little grass or soft cover. For herbivores, it was a spiny buffet, more about endurance than luxury. To survive here meant learning to travel light, to keep moving between patches of green before they withered in the heat. Fossils can tell us what these creatures looked like, but their footprints tell us how they lived. Across ancient floodplains and dried lakes, paleontologists find trackways preserved in perfect detail, each step frozen in time like a heartbeat of movement. From these impressions we can measure stride length, speed, even how many animals move together. A trail of 3 parallel sets of footprints might reveal a small group moving in the same direction, perhaps a family or a temporary herd. Some tracks show a running gait, others a slow, meandering pace, pausing by the marks of a waterline. In these patterns, the stillness of fossils becomes motion again, and the past regains its rhythm. It is astonishing how much a single track can whisper, how fast, how heavy, how social. It is the closest thing we have to watching a dinosaur take a walk. Inside the bones themselves, stories continue. When thin sections of fossil bone are studied under a microscope, they reveal growth rings, light and dark bands, like those in a tree trunk. These rings tell of changing seasons, periods of fast growth during warmth and abundance, then slower growth during drought or cold. In the earliest dinosaurs, these patterns show that growth was rapid, suggesting metabolisms more active than those of typical reptiles. They were not quite warm-blooded like birds or mammals, but neither were they fully cold-blooded. They lived in a metabolic middle ground, able to move swiftly and recover quickly, a useful skill in a land of predators and unpredictable weather. Even at this early stage, evolution was already experimenting with speed, endurance, and adaptability. The real magic of the Triassic lay at its boundaries, those shifting edges where one environment faded into another. Rivers met deserts, coasts met plains, fire met forest. These transition zones were places of constant change and constant opportunity. When one patch dried out, life could retreat to another. When floods came, new plants and nutrients spread across the land. It was at these edges that innovation thrived. Crocline archosaurs lurked in muddy shallows, perfecting ambush. Small mammals, still tiny and secretive, dug burrows in sandy soils. And nimble dinosaurs dashed between both worlds, testing the ground for what might come next. Over tens of millions of years, these subtle competitions and quiet adaptations built the foundation for the world to follow. But the Triassic was not a gentle time. Volcanoes simmered beneath the crust, oceans fluctuated in chemistry, and the planet's climate teetered on the edge of instability. Many lineages would rise, flourish, and fade again before the age was done. The true reign of the dinosaurs was still waiting beyond a threshold of disaster, a planetary reset that would clear the stage and open the world to the forms ready to fill it. For now, in the deep glow of the Triassic, life was finding its footing again after catastrophe. Tiny two-legged reptiles raced through ferny valleys under an orange sun. Amphibians lurked in warm shallows, and dragonflies the size of dinner plates drifted above the water. The earth was warm, alive, and restless, a laboratory of sunlight and dust. In the distance, the first small dinosaurs stretched their limbs and began to run, unaware that they were rehearsing for an empire that would last nearly 200 million years. When life first returned to the seas in the Triassic, it was not starting from scratch, it was returning home. The ancestors of these new marine reptiles had once been land dwellers, their limbs built for walking, their lungs for breathing air, their bodies heavy with bone. But over millions of years, some found their way back into the water, drawn by its abundance and stability. In doing so, they began one of evolution's most remarkable makeovers, trading claws for flippers and scales for sleek hydrodynamic grace. Ichthyosaurs were among the first to make the transition fully. Their name means fish lizard, and the description fits neatly. Their bodies became streamlined like torpedoes, with a crescent tail fin and a long pointed snout filled with sharp conical teeth. Fossils show that their limb bones flattened and shortened into paddle-like flippers, while their vertebrae became compact and flexible, allowing effortless side-to-side motion. They did not copy fish consciously, of course. Evolution has no blueprint. But nature tends to find the same solutions again and again when faced with the same challenges. Streamlining, for instance, is an ancient trick, rediscovered by sharks, dolphins, and even submarines. The ocean rewards efficiency, and these reptiles had learned its rhythm. Nothosaurs, slightly older and more primitive than ichthyosaurs, lived a double life between water and land. They swam with long, flexible bodies and used webbed limbs to propel themselves through shallow coastal seas, but they could still crawl ashore to rest or nest. Their long necks and sharp teeth suggest a patient hunter's style, perhaps ambushing fish and squid near reefs or lagoons. Some paleontologists imagine them basking on rocks between dives, like seals or marine iguanas today, glancing at the sky where pterosaurs might already have begun to circle. These were creatures in transition, halfway between shore and sea, learning the ocean's rules one adaptation at a time. One of the most extraordinary clues about these ancient swimmers comes from a single fossil, an ichthyosaur caught in the act of giving birth. Inside her fossilized body, smaller skeletons were preserved. One halfway emerged from her tail end, head first, an unmistakable sign of live birth. This was no rare accident. It reveals that ichthyosaurs, like modern whales and dolphins, bore live young in the open water. Laying eggs on land would have been impossible for such fully aquatic forms. Instead, they evolved nurseries in the ocean itself, where mothers gave birth to already capable swimming young. It is an elegant solution, sparing them the dangers of beaches and tides, and proof that these reptiles had completely claimed the marine realm as their own. The Triassic oceans, though calmer than the land above, were far from empty. There were multiple ways to make a living in this watery world. Some ichthyosaurs were built for speed, with long narrow snouts and small teeth for snatching slippery fish. Others developed robust jaws and crushing teeth, adapted to hunt armoured prey such as ammonites. Along the coasts, nothosaurs and their relatives stalked the shallows, lying in wait among reefs and seagrass beds. In open waters, streamlined ichthyosaurs cruised for miles, their massive eyes, some of the largest ever evolved, helping them hunt in dim light. Fossilized eye bones show that certain species had sclerotic rings wider than a human hand, suggesting they could see in the gloom of deeper seas or perhaps under the pale light of a Triassic moon. Their prey, the ammonites, were just as remarkable. These coiled-shelled cephalopods were the distant cousins of squid and octopuses, and they came in an astonishing variety of shapes and sizes. Some were smooth and elegant, others were ridged and spiked, like tiny works of art. For paleontologists, ammonites are invaluable because they evolved rapidly and spread widely, meaning their fossils can be used to date rock layers with precision. For the ichthyosaurs, however, they were simply dinner, nutritious packets of protein encased in calcium carbonate. The relationship between predator and prey, between hunter and ammonite, became one of the defining patterns of the Mesozoic seas. To live underwater requires more than just strength. It demands new senses. Sound travels faster in water than in air, and low frequencies can carry for miles. Some researchers suggest that ichthyosaurs may have used sound in ways similar to dolphins, though not with true echolocation. Their skulls show adaptations that might have helped them detect vibrations or pressure changes, the underwater equivalent of footsteps in sand. Vision too had to adapt. The water filtered sunlight quickly, especially at depth, so large eyes and sensitive retinas became crucial. Nothosaurs, hunting in shallower waters, may have relied more on sight and ambush. Ichthyosaurs out in the open ocean likely used a mix of sight and subtle motion detection to find prey in the endless blue. It was a sensory world quieter than ours, but sharper in every direction. The Triassic seas were complex ecosystems, layered like a living pyramid. At the base were plankton, microscopic plants and algae capturing sunlight and turning it into chemical energy. Tiny crustaceans and filter feeders consumed them, followed by fish and squid, and finally the great reptiles that ruled above all. Fossil evidence shows that these food webs were astonishingly stable for millions of years. The productivity of the oceans buffered life from the harsher rhythms of the land. While droughts could wither forests and starve rivers, the sea remained a place of constant renewal, recycling nutrients and energy through tides, storms, and currents. Even as continents baked under sun, the oceans quietly pulsed with life. Occasionally, though, the sea revealed its power. In many Triassic rock layers, paleontologists find tempest beds, thin layers of broken shells, torn plants, and scattered bones deposited by ancient storms. These sudden bursts of energy left behind concentrated fossils, skeletons of fish and reptiles mixed together, preserved as if frozen mid-chaos. To read one of these storm beds is to glimpse a moment of violence followed by stillness, a cyclone tearing across a shallow sea, lifting sediment and life alike, then settling into silence once again. The bones resting there for hundreds of millions of years speak not just of death, but of the ocean's ability to shape and erase in the same gesture. What is most humbling about these early marine reptiles is not their power or size, but their elegance. They were solutions, sculpted slowly by pressure and motion, until every limb, tooth, and vertebra served a purpose. Each one embodied the patience of the ocean itself, an engineer that measures progress not in years but in currents and tides. Long before whales, before sharks and tuna took their modern forms, the ichthyosaurs and nothosaurs ruled these ancient waters with quiet mastery. And though their time would eventually pass, the ocean kept their designs. The same shapes, the same physics, the same subtle perfection of streamlining would appear again and again throughout life's story. Evolution, it seems, never forgets a good idea. It just waits for the next tide to bring it back. The first creatures to truly master the sky were not birds and not insects, but reptiles, pterosaurs, the aerial pioneers of the Mesozoic. They appeared over 220 million years ago, around the same time the earliest dinosaurs were finding their footing on land. While their relatives were learning to run, these bold experimenters were learning to fly. It was a revolution not of speed or strength, but of lightness. To take to the air meant to defy gravity through precision, efficiency, and an elegance of design that even modern aircraft engineers would admire. A pterosaur's skeleton was a masterpiece of weight reduction. Its bones were hollow yet strong, reinforced internally by a lattice of struts that resisted bending without adding mass. The chest supported powerful flight muscles anchored to a keeled breastbone, while the torso stiffened to stabilize the wings in motion. But the most extraordinary feature was the hand. The fourth finger, absurdly long, sometimes longer than the animal's entire body, formed the main spar of the wing. A membrane of skin and muscle stretched from this finger to the body, and often down toward the hind limb. creating a flexible surface that could adjust its shape mid-flight. This was not the stiff, feathered wing of a bird, but a living, breathing airfoil. It could twist, ripple, and fine-tune itself to every gust of wind. There's a kind of poetry in how nature solved the problem of flight again and again. Insects had already conquered the air hundreds of millions of years earlier. Birds would follow later, and bats much later still. But pterosaurs were the first vertebrates to evolve powered flight. Their success lay in the physics of balance, lift overcoming gravity, thrust countering drag. The larger species would have relied on soaring, gliding long distances on columns of rising air. Smaller ones with short, broad wings could flap quickly to chase insects or dart among trees. Some would have flown low over water, snatching fish in quick dives, while others might have circled carrion sites on land, gliding patiently on thermals in the heat of the afternoon. The sky offered many ways to make a living, and evolution, as always, filled every one of them. How pterosaurs launched themselves has fascinated scientists for decades. Early theories imagined them running down cliffs like hang gliders or leaping from trees. But newer research points to a clever alternative: quadrupedal vaulting. Their strong forelimbs acted as catapults, pushing the animal upward and forward in one explosive motion before the wings fully opened. This made takeoff possible even from flat ground, a useful trick for a creature that might have stood several meters tall with a wingspan broader than a small plane. The mechanics are simple in principle, but demanding in execution. Power, timing, and coordination in a fraction of a second. It was the evolutionary equivalent of a gymnast's perfect launch, repeated countless times a day. Once in the air, the pterosaur's world expanded into endless dimensions. The physics of flight rewards patience and intelligence. Rising air along cliffs or heated plains provides free energy, invisible roads etched in motion. A skilled flyer could travel great distances without flapping much at all, conserving precious calories. It's the same principle used by albatrosses today, gliding effortlessly for hours over the sea. In an age where insects swarmed in staggering numbers, the skies must have shimmered with opportunities. Some pterosaurs were fine-tuned insectivores, snapping prey mid-air with slender jaws. Others specialized in fish, their beaks long and pointed, ideal for precision strikes. A few evolved broader, curved jaws for scavenging or even cracking shellfish. The diversity of beak shapes across species is like a menu written in bone. They lived in a world that demanded a relationship with the wind. Fossil sites show that many pterosaurs preferred coastal regions where sea cliffs generated reliable updrafts. There, they could launch easily, glide over water in search of prey, and return to rest without expending much energy. Inland, thermals rising from hot ground created spiraling elevators of air. By learning to read these invisible forces, pterosaurs turned the planet's weather into their infrastructure. Evening updrafts, created when cooler air met the warmth of the land, would have been ideal for sustained, graceful flights. To imagine a sky filled with them, dozens circling silently above a sunlit coast, is to glimpse a calm grandeur we can only faintly reconstruct today. Their bones, delicate as they were, also tell us something of their lives. Growth rings in fossilized bone show that many species grew quickly, reaching near adult size within a year. This fast growth suggests a high metabolism, perhaps closer to warm-blooded animals than reptiles as we know them. Some discoveries even hint at social behavior. Clusters of eggs and juvenile remains suggest that at least a few species nested in colonies, much like seabirds. In such a colony, the air would be alive with the sound of wing beats, the calls of young, and the steady rush of wind over hundreds of membranes, a living symphony of flight. And of course, It's hard not to smile at the idea of these creatures as nature's ultralight aircraft. Registration pending, of course. They flew not with engines, but with elegance, relying on physics so well mastered that even the largest pterosaurs, with wingspans exceeding 10 meters, could lift into the air without drama. They were the engineers of the Triassic and Jurassic skies, living proofs that lightness could be strength, and that a thin stretch of skin could carry life halfway across a continent. Later in history, as true birds emerged, they would share the skies for millions of years. Rather than competing directly, evolution found ways for both to coexist. Pterosaurs occupied different niches, larger forms soaring over oceans, smaller ones catching insects at twilight, while birds explored new styles of flight and nesting. The sky became a shared ecosystem, its currents divided by scale, speed, and behaviour. To look back now at the fossils of these first flyers is to glimpse one of nature's finest balancing acts. They took the same bones that once walked through deserts and reimagined them for air. Their success was not measured in dominance but in duration. They ruled the skies for over 150 million years, longer than mammals have existed. The imprint of their wings may have faded, but the principles that carried them still fill the air today. Every time a seabird glides, a bat turns, or a glider catches a thermal. In a sense, the pterosaurs never really left us. The same winds that lifted them still blow across the earth, patient and unseen, waiting for whatever life dares next to rise into their arms. Every so often, the planet hits a reset button. Not deliberately, of course. Earth has no intentions, only rhythms, but the effect is the same. Life flourishes, diversifies, fills every corner of the map, and then suddenly something shifts. Volcanoes awaken, the air thickens, oceans turn sour, and the balance collapses. The end of the Triassic period was one of those moments, a storm of geological proportions that would erase entire ecosystems and quietly set the stage for the age of dinosaurs to truly begin. The cause of this upheaval lay deep beneath Pangaea's crust, where colossal fractures began to tear the supercontinent apart. As the Atlantic Ocean's first rift valleys opened, magma surged upward in a series of apocalyptic eruptions. This event is known today as the Central Atlantic Magmatic Province, and it was no local affair. It stretched across what would one day become North America, Europe, and Africa. Over the course of just a few 100,000 years, a geological instant, lava flooded vast regions, layering the land in basalt. The total volume of rock produced is almost beyond imagination. Millions of cubic kilometers of molten stone, enough to drown entire continents in heat and fire. But the real destruction came not from the lava itself, but from what it released. Every eruption poured carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and other gases into the atmosphere. These gases trapped heat, driving global temperatures upward. At the same time, sulfur compounds formed acid rain that scoured vegetation and disrupted soils. The oceans absorbed much of the excess carbon dioxide, altering their chemistry and lowering their pH, a process known as ocean acidification. Marine creatures that built shells or skeletons from calcium carbonate found it harder to survive as their very building material dissolved around them. On land, temperature swings and collapsing food chains sent countless species into decline. The fossil record shows that nearly half of all known marine genera disappeared during this period, along with many terrestrial reptiles and amphibians. Some estimates suggest that the extinction rivaled even the one that closed the Permian, though on a slightly smaller scale. The Earth did not fall silent overnight. It's unlikely that any living creature would have noticed a single moment of catastrophe, but over the course of tens of thousands of years, life thinned. Forests turned patchy, coral reefs vanished, and entire predator-prey relationships broke apart. The world that emerged afterward was recognizably new, As with all extinctions, there were winners and losers. Many of the great Triassic reptiles, Rauisuchians, large amphibians, and several families of marine predators simply disappeared. The ecological roles they once held were left vacant, open to any lineage capable of stepping in. Among the survivors were the small, lightly built dinosaurs and their flying relatives, the pterosaurs. Their efficient posture, active metabolism, and perhaps even faster reproduction rates gave them an edge in a world of scarce resources. Crocline archosaurs, though greatly reduced in number, adapted by moving into freshwater and coastal niches, where they would endure in modified form right up to the present day. The pattern was familiar. When complexity collapses, flexibility thrives. Recovery, in geological terms, was neither swift nor uniform. Some regions bounced back within a few 100,000 years, while others took millions to re-establish stable ecosystems. In the grand sweep of time, this is a blink, but for the creatures living through it, it would have felt endless. Evolution works best with patience, and after such a purge, the playing field was wide open. Plants reclaimed bare ground, insects diversified again, and dinosaurs, once minor players in the Triassic drama, began to dominate the land in 1,000 forms. The rocks themselves preserve the record of this transformation in remarkable detail. Across the world, geologists have identified thin but unmistakable layers marking the boundary between the Triassic and Jurassic periods. These boundary layers often contain chemical fingerprints of chaos, spikes in carbon isotopes that reveal shifts in the global carbon cycle, evidence of greenhouse conditions, and sometimes traces of iridium, a rare element often linked to extraterrestrial impact but also found in volcanic ash. Together they form a global signature, a scar left by heat and gas and time. To a trained eye, that line in the rock represents a turning point in life's autobiography, a page scorched but not destroyed. What stands out most about events like this is how life always returns. Extinctions prune the tree of life, but they do not uproot it. The surviving branches adapt, twist, and grow into the empty space, reshaping the forest anew. After the end Triassic collapse, new species radiated outward with astonishing creativity. Dinosaurs diversified into an array of sizes and shapes, from swift hunters to long-necked grazers. In the oceans, ichthyosaurs rebounded, joined by plesiosaurs and early sharks that evolved to fill abandoned niches. Even the plants responded. Conifers spread into areas once too hot or dry for them, creating fresh ecosystems for insects and herbivores. In the wake of destruction, the planet reimagined itself. There is a quiet lesson in that resilience. Diversity is not just decoration, it is insurance. The more varied life becomes, the more options it has when the environment changes. Ecosystems rich in overlapping roles can absorb shocks, because not every thread snaps at once. Redundancy, in this sense, is life's way of protecting its own story. When one lineage falls, another can step in. It is an elegant strategy, though it relies on abundance built up over millions of years, something modern humans might do well to remember. From our perspective, looking back across 200 million years, the end of the Triassic appears like a storm seen from space. Vast, powerful, but also strangely beautiful. It erased, yes, but it also cleared the way. The world that followed would see forests reclaim the coasts, rivers fill with new life, and the sky darken with wings. Out of the heat and poison of that time rose the first true dinosaurs of the Jurassic, the ones that would rule the Earth for ages to come. In the end, the boundary between destruction and creation is thinner than it appears. To the rocks, extinction and evolution are simply two sides of the same slow geological coin. Every ending is also an invitation. The planet breathes out, resets its rhythms and begins again. The Jurassic world was a planet wrapped in warmth and abundance. After the volcanic chaos of the Triassic faded, Earth settled into a long, stable rhythm, a greenhouse age without ice caps, where high sea levels turned continents into mosaics of islands, deltas, and lush coastal plains. The air was rich with moisture, the skies heavy with slow rolling clouds, and the seasons mild enough for forests to stretch from equator to pole. Life responded with enthusiasm. Plants thickened the air with oxygen, insects swarmed in dazzling numbers, and the great reptiles of the land grew to sizes that would never again be matched. It was an age of greenery and grace, where evolution took its time and the earth exhaled. The climate of the Jurassic was steady but far from static. Warmth radiated evenly across the planet, while vast monsoon belts swept around the equatorial regions. These monsoons, driven by the slow breathing of the oceans, brought rhythmic cycles of rain and dryness that fed the rivers and nourished the forests. There were no polar ice caps to trap water, so the seas flooded inland, creating shallow coastlines and long estuaries where marine and freshwater life mingled. The continents themselves were in motion, drifting apart from their once united form as Pangaea, and as they separated, new climates formed along their seams, humid tropics near the equator, temperate regions further north and south, and dry interiors that bloomed briefly after seasonal rains. The rivers of this age were restless and generous. They wandered across vast plains, splitting into oxbows, forming levees, and pooling into seasonal lakes. Each change in course created new opportunity for life. Floods brought nutrient-rich silt, renewing the soil. Shallow lagoons and mudflats became nurseries for fish and amphibians, while fallen trees in old channels offered shelter for invertebrates and small reptiles. These floodplains were alive with cycles of birth, death, and renewal, their rhythms guided not by clocks but by the steady turning of the seasons. For the plants and animals that lived there, abundance was both a blessing and a responsibility. Everything grew quickly, but everything also had to adapt to constant change. Above these waterways rose forests of astonishing scale. Towering conifers formed the backbone of the Jurassic canopy, their needle-like leaves filtering sunlight into shifting mosaics on the ground below. Between their trunks grew cycads and tree ferns, and beneath them, vast carpets of smaller ferns and horsetails thrived in the damp shade. Horsetails, with their hollow stems and jointed segments, crowded the river margins like living fossils, just as their ancestors had done for hundreds of millions of years. It was a world without flowers. Angiosperms had not yet evolved, but the palette of green was rich and varied. Each layer of vegetation formed its own habitat, from the treetops to the forest floor, supporting creatures of every shape and size. Where plants multiplied, insects followed. The Jurassic skies buzzed and shimmered with dragonflies, beetles, early moths, and swarms of delicate flies. Though true pollination was still in its infancy, insects and plants were already experimenting with partnership. Some early cycads and ginkgos produced scents to attract beetles and other pollinators, while plants evolved tougher leaves and chemical defences to deter hungry mouths. This quiet arms race shaped much of what would follow. Fossil leaves from the period show the scars of ancient insect bites, delicate lacework patterns that record feeding behaviour like notes in a symphony. Each nibble, each adaptation, was a step toward the intricate web of interactions that would later define terrestrial life. Among the great players of this warm age were the sauropods, the long-necked giants that have become icons of deep time. Their immense size was not a random extravagance, it was an ecological strategy. In an era of abundant vegetation, a large body offered both efficiency and safety. Huge guts could process vast amounts of low-quality plant matter, and great size discouraged all but the bravest predators. Fossil evidence suggests that many sauropods lived in loosely organised herds, moving slowly across the landscape in search of fresh greenery. Some regions reveal trackways clustered along ancient river bars, suggesting seasonal gatherings, perhaps nurseries where females laid their eggs and juveniles hatched in relative safety. The warm, stable climate meant that nesting could occur on open ground without fear of frost or scarcity. For tens of millions of years, this system worked flawlessly, and sauropods became living monuments to the productivity of the Jurassic greenhouse. The soundscape of this world would have been as rich as its colours. Imagine standing at the edge of a Jurassic floodplain at dusk. The air is heavy with the scent of damp vegetation. Crickets and cicadas, early cousins of those that still sing today, fill the air with rhythmic churring. From the distance comes a low, resonant bellow, perhaps the call of a sauropod communicating with its herd. Wind moves softly through conifer crowns, a slow whisper punctuated by the rustle of giant wings as pterosaurs glide overhead. Even the rivers contribute to the music, steady gurgles and splashes where reptiles wade through shallows or fish break the surface. It is a chorus of motion and life, one that never truly falls silent. In this abundance, behaviour began to diversify. When resources are plentiful, species can afford to specialise, to become experts rather than generalists. Insects evolved to target specific plants. Herbivores chose favoured leaves and heights within the forest. Predators learned to focus on certain prey, yet abundance has its flip side. When conditions turned dry or storms broke the river's banks, animals were forced to move, sometimes over great distances, to find stability again. Fossil evidence suggests that migration was a common theme in the Jurassic. Herds following green growth along floodplains, pterosaurs travelling between coastal colonies, and small reptiles seeking shelter in newly formed wetlands. Life flowed with the landscape itself, drawn by invisible lines of temperature and rainfall. The Jurassic greenhouse was, in many ways, Earth at its most fertile. The combination of high carbon dioxide, warm temperatures, and constant rainfall created a biosphere overflowing with energy. Yet it was not a world of chaos. It was balanced, rhythmic, and patient. The land breathed in time with the monsoons, the rivers wrote new paths with each flood, and the forests hummed with quiet activity. For nearly 60 million years this equilibrium held, producing some of the most extraordinary biodiversity the planet had ever known. To walk through such a world, even just in imagination, is to understand how life flourishes when given warmth, time, and space. The Jurassic was not an age of struggle, but of expression. Everything, plants, insects, reptiles, and the very climate itself, worked together in slow, perpetual motion. The Earth had found a long moment of harmony, a deep green calm beneath the endless summer of its ancient sun. The sauropods were Earth's living skyscrapers, moving cathedrals of bone and air that redefined what it meant to be large. When most creatures might measure their height in meters, sauropods thought in stories. A single step could shake the ground, yet there was nothing clumsy about them. They were giants with grace, built not on brute force but on elegance of design. Every bone, muscle, and breath was part of a carefully balanced equation that made the impossible seem effortless. Their size was not just impressive, it was a biological miracle. The secret lay in the architecture of their skeletons. Sauropod bones were strong but astonishingly light, filled with a latticework of air spaces that reduced their weight without compromising strength. This internal scaffolding, known as pneumaticity, is the same trick used by birds today to make flight possible. The neck vertebrae, some over a metre long, were like bridges of hollow steel, each one locking perfectly into the next. Their long necks, stretching 5, 10, even 15 meters, acted like feeding envelopes, huge arcs of reach that allowed them to graze both high and low without having to move their massive bodies far. Some species browsed among the tree canopies, sweeping their necks like cranes through leaves and branches, while others grazed at shoulder height, content to clear vast fields of ferns and cycads. Evolution had created the perfect combination of strength and efficiency, a living lesson in structural engineering. Moving such a colossal body also demanded careful attention to balance. A sauropod's legs were arranged in near-perfect columns, supporting weight the way architectural pillars support a roof. Their stance was wide and stable, their feet cushioned by thick pads that softened each step. The tail served as a counterweight, extending behind them like a living bridge cable, keeping the centre of gravity steady. The result was a slow but graceful stride, steady, deliberate, and astonishingly energy efficient for an animal that could weigh as much as 10 elephants. Yet it wasn't just their bones that kept them alive, it was their breath. Circulating oxygen through a neck several times longer than a giraffe's is no small task, and a simple reptilian lung would never have been up to it. Evidence from the structure of their bones suggests that sauropods developed an advanced respiratory system, similar to that of modern birds. Instead of lungs that inflate and deflate like bellows, they likely had a system of air sacs that moved air in a continuous loop, providing a constant flow of fresh oxygen. These air sacs also invaded the vertebrae and ribs, creating those weight-saving cavities. It was a system as elegant as it was effective, allowing these titans to fuel their slow, steady movements without overheating or collapsing under their own weight. The heart too had to rise to the challenge, literally. To pump blood from a chest as wide as a car up a neck long enough to see tomorrow's weather before your feet do, a sauropod's cardiovascular system needed both power and precision. Some scientists estimate that their hearts may have weighed several hundred kilograms, producing pressures far beyond anything found in modern animals. Others suggest that their blood pressure was moderated by one-way valves in the neck arteries, preventing the kind of dizzying head rush that would make even a giant faint. However they managed it, the result was seamless. No one ever found a sauropod fossil with a note that said "ran out of steam" halfway up the neck. Feeding strategies among these giants varied as elegantly as their forms. In an environment overflowing with greenery, competition was solved through subtle differences in height and reach. Low browsers swept the ground, stripping ferns and horsetails. Medium-height feeders plucked at shrubs and young trees, while the tallest species, with necks reaching higher than most modern buildings, fed from the treetops. This division of labour, known as niche partitioning, allowed multiple sauropod species to share the same ecosystem without directly competing. Each found its own layer of the green world, and together they formed one of the most efficient herbivore communities in history. Living at such a scale also demanded social cooperation. Fossilised trackways reveal long parallel trails where dozens of individuals moved together, each leaving massive circular impressions in soft earth. These patterns suggest herding behaviour, perhaps family groups or migrating populations following the seasonal growth of vegetation. The term green wave migration describes this beautifully. As rains swept across the land, new plants sprouted, and the herds followed them like a slow rolling tide. Moving together provided safety too. Predators might take a young or sick individual, but an adult sauropod was simply too big to tackle. Even the fiercest carnivores of the time would have thought twice before confronting a creature that could crush them with a single step. The fossil record of sauropod nurseries gives us a glimpse into their quieter moments. In some regions, scientists have found vast nesting grounds, where eggs the size of grapefruits were laid in shallow pits and covered with vegetation for warmth. Hatchlings, no larger than a human baby, would have faced a dangerous world. tiny targets for hungry predators. Their survival depended on rapid growth, and the evidence from bone histology supports this. Young sauropods grew at astonishing rates, reaching several tons in just a few years. Growth rings within their bones record these surges, each one marking a season of abundance or scarcity. It was a biological race against time. The faster they grew, the safer they became. Their defense, once full-grown, was not speed, but presence. A single adult could outweigh any predator, and a herd of them would have been an unmovable force. Some species developed long, whip-like tails capable of producing cracks that may have served as warning signals, or possibly deterrents to would-be attackers. Others relied purely on size and awareness, their sheer bulk acting as a deterrent. In such a world, vigilance mattered more than velocity. With eyes high above the landscape, sauropods could see predators coming long before danger was close. And yet, for all their enormity, there is a serenity to imagining them. Moving slowly through misty valleys, their silhouettes rising above forests, the sound of their breathing mingling with wind and insects. They were not monsters, not thunderous destroyers, but quiet gardeners of the Jurassic world. Their appetites shaped ecosystems, their migrations fertilized plains, and their shadows cooled the ground. Life beneath them evolved in their wake, adapting to the steady rhythm of their passing. It is humbling to remember that these giants were not rare. They were ordinary, as common in their day as grazing herds are now. The earth was theirs, yet they left no destruction in their path, only footprints, bones, and the occasional reminder that even the largest creatures can live lightly on their world. For more than 100 million years, sauropods demonstrated that grace and scale are not opposites. They are partners in the grand geometry of life. The Jurassic world was not only a paradise for giants, but a proving ground for predators. In this age of abundance, the great hunters of the land, creatures like Allosaurus, had perfected the art of balance. They were not reckless killers, but participants in a quiet arithmetic of survival. For every hunter, there had to be enough prey. For every chase, a margin of energy gained had to outweigh the energy spent. Predation, at its core, is a business of efficiency, and Allosaurus was one of the most successful accountants in Earth's long history. Its body was an instrument of precision, tuned by evolution for both strength and control. Allosaurus stood about 8 or 9 meters long, weighing perhaps 2 tons, and every part of it spoke to versatility. Its skull was large but lightly built, with openings that reduced weight while preserving power. Muscles attached along the back of the skull and neck suggest that it could swing its head like a hatchet, striking with jaws slightly open to inflict slashing wounds. Unlike later tyrannosaurs, which relied on bone-crushing bites, Allosaurus seemed to favour a grab-and-wait strategy. It may have bitten, stepped back, and then followed its wounded prey until exhaustion set in. This approach conserved energy and reduced the risk of injury, an important consideration when your body is also your only weapon. Fossils offer haunting glimpses of this deadly dance. Bones of herbivorous dinosaurs often bear tooth marks from Allosaurus, some of them partially healed. These healed wounds tell us that not every hunt ended in death, and that prey and predator shared the same landscape long enough for survival and recovery to be routine. Pathologies in Allosaurus fossils themselves, broken ribs, healed fractures, even damaged tails, reveal that life as a predator came with its own hazards. Hunting was dangerous work, and sometimes the hunter lost. Even their fossilized droppings, known as coprolites, provide evidence of diet, bits of bone, scales, and plant fragments that record the complex feeding habits of a top carnivore who rarely wasted a meal. The image of Allosaurus as a solitary killer may not tell the full story. Some bone beds contain remains of several individuals found together, hinting at possible social interactions. Whether this means true cooperation, like modern wolves, or simply opportunistic gathering at carcasses, remains uncertain, but it suggests flexibility. Perhaps Allosaurus hunted alone when food was plentiful, and gathered in loose groups when prey was scarce or large. The fossil record leaves room for both possibilities, and either way, the behaviour would have been adaptive. In a world of massive herbivores, strategy mattered more than size. Scavenging too played an essential role. The word sometimes carries an unfair reputation, as if scavengers were failures compared to active hunters. In truth, scavenging is one of nature's most reliable professions. A carcass provides concentrated energy for minimal effort, and the smell of death carries far. Allosaurus may have followed vultures or smaller carnivores to locate meals, using its height and strength to dominate the feast. In ecosystems ancient and modern, scavenging is not a fallback. It is a vital link that keeps nutrients moving and prevents decay from becoming disaster. Even the kings of the Jurassic Plains were not above taking what opportunity offered. Territory in those times was not marked by borders on a map, but by the contours of the land itself. Predators were shaped by their geography as much as by genetics. River crossings, forest edges, and open floodplains all funneled prey into predictable paths. Over time, hunters would have learned the movements of herds and the timing of migrations. Fossilized footprints show how certain areas became corridors of life, places where paths of predator and prey overlapped again and again. An Allosaurus waiting near a waterhole or narrow pass would not have needed constant pursuit. Patience in the Jurassic was often more powerful than speed, yet even the mightiest hunter is ruled by fear, if not of being eaten, then of failing to eat. Ecologists call this dynamic the landscape of fear, where prey animals alter their behaviour not just to avoid being caught, but to avoid even the chance of being caught. The shadow of a predator changes how herds move, how they graze, and even where they sleep. In return, predators must constantly adapt to this vigilance, changing their own routines in response. It is a slow arms race of awareness. A herd that learns to watch the valleys forces the hunter to learn the ridges. Each side shapes the other, creating an invisible choreography of motion and response. The result is stability, not through dominance but through tension held in balance. There are limits to how many large predators a landscape can sustain. Every ecosystem has an energetic ceiling, determined by the total biomass of prey available and the efficiency of the food chain. Too many hunters, and they starve each other out. Too few and prey populations explode, stripping vegetation until famine resets the system. The fossils of the Morrison Formation in North America, a treasure trove of late Jurassic life, suggest that for every large carnivore like Allosaurus, there were dozens of herbivores, sauropods, stegosaurs and ornithopods, all feeding and breeding in vast numbers. This ratio, roughly 1 predator to 50 or more prey, is a formula that still applies today across most large ecosystems. Nature, it seems, always finds her equilibrium. To modernize the life of a Jurassic predator might look brutal, but to the Earth it was a form of order. Each kill fed not only the hunter, but countless scavengers, insects, and decomposers. Nothing went to waste. Bones left on floodplains enriched the soil. Plants grew thick in the nutrients they released, and herbivores returned to graze on that same ground. In time, those bones fossilized, turning the cycle of death into the permanence of stone. Even in Extinction, the system left a trace of its symmetry. It's easy to picture Allosaurus as a roaring monster, but the truth is more subtle and more interesting. It was a creature of calculation, not chaos, a product of math written in muscle and instinct. Each movement, each hunt, each scar followed a logic refined by millions of years of practice. The success of the species was not in endless conquest, but in knowing exactly how much the world could give and taking no more. Predators like Allosaurus remind us that survival is not about dominance but balance. They were the regulators of the Jurassic, ensuring that no part of the food web grew too heavy or too thin. Their reign was measured not in cruelty but in restraint, a partnership with prey that kept the cycle turning smoothly. When we imagine them standing in the warm light of a Jurassic dawn, jaws glinting, muscles coiled, it is not the face of terror we should see, but the calm of equilibrium. For in that quiet arithmetic between hunger and abundance, life found one of its most perfect equations. For all their size and strangeness, dinosaurs were not so different from living creatures today. They ate, they moved, they communicated, and they rested. They built nests, raised young, and listened to the world around them through senses finely tuned to survival. The bones we find may be cold and silent, but the lives they once carried were warm, complex, and filled with small daily rhythms: sunrise foraging, cautious rest, and quiet moments of care. To imagine them is to glimpse a living planet in motion, not a parade of monsters, but a network of families, instincts, and fleeting, ordinary miracles. Fossilized nesting grounds are among the most intimate windows we have into dinosaur lives. Across ancient floodplains and sandy ridges, paleontologists have uncovered clusters of circular depressions, each one a nest, still lined with bits of eggshell. The porosity of those shells, the microscopic pores that let air pass through, tells us how the eggs were incubated. Highly porous shells suggest that they were buried in warm soil or vegetation, much like crocodiles and turtles do today. Less porous shells indicate open nests, perhaps warmed by the sun or even by the careful attention of a brooding parent. Some nesting sites stretch for hundreds of meters, forming colonies where dozens of individuals laid their eggs in close proximity. This hints at social behavior and possibly synchronized breeding seasons. A landscape filled with the gentle stir of hatching young would have been a noisy, lively scene, part nursery, part battleground for survival. The question of parental care has long fascinated scientists. Some dinosaurs may have laid their eggs and left them to fate, trusting to numbers and luck. Others show signs of more devoted investment. Fossilized bone beds sometimes preserve individuals of multiple ages together, adults alongside juveniles, suggesting extended family groups. In species like Maiasaura, literally named the good mother lizard, entire nesting grounds with juveniles of varying sizes indicate that the young remained in the nest or nearby after hatching. Adults likely brought food or protection, teaching the next generation the basic geography of survival. Even among the giants, such as sauropods, evidence of mass nesting sites implies coordinated behavior, as if safety came from numbers rather than individual guardianship. These clues reveal a spectrum of parenting styles, from the indifferent to the deeply involved, proof that evolution was experimenting not just with bodies, but with behavior. Young dinosaurs occupied a different world from their towering parents. Small size brought vulnerability, but also speed and flexibility. Fossilized trackways show clusters of juvenile footprints, separate from adults, suggesting that some species formed their own groups, like schools of fish, moving together for protection. In environments full of predators, this made sense. There is safety in confusion, and more eyes mean earlier warnings. Paleontologists even describe predator saturation events, where so many hatchlings emerged at once that predators could not possibly eat them all. For a brief noisy week, the floodplains would have swarmed with tiny squeaking dinosaurs darting between ferns, a chaotic but effective survival strategy. To understand how these animals sense their world, scientists turn to endocasts, casts of the internal spaces within fossilized skulls that once held the brain. From their shapes, we can infer which senses were emphasized. Many predatory dinosaurs, such as Allosaurus or Tyrannosaurus, had large olfactory bulbs, suggesting a keen sense of smell, useful for tracking prey or detecting carcasses. The optic lobes were also well developed, indicating strong vision. Forward-facing eyes gave depth perception, vital for judging distance when hunting. In contrast, herbivorous dinosaurs often had eyes placed more to the sides, providing wide-angle awareness of potential threats. Balance centers, particularly in the inner ear region, show that dinosaurs were not sluggish. Their bodies were coordinated and responsive. Yet there are limits to what endocasts can tell us. The brain does not fossilize. An empty space is only a hint at the circuitry that once pulsed within. Still, these clues remind us that dinosaurs were not mindless. They were sensory specialists, each tuned to a unique way of experiencing the world. Communication among dinosaurs likely ranged from subtle signals to grand displays. Crests, frills, and horns were not just for combat, they were billboards of identity. Some had hollow chambers in their skulls that could have functioned as resonating tubes, amplifying low-frequency calls that rolled across the plains. Others relied on colour, pattern, or movement, fluttering feathers, raised spines, or rhythmic tail swishes to send messages of dominance or affection. Even today, birds and reptiles use the same methods: posture, sound, and colour, all woven into a social language far older than humanity. Group-living species may have maintained cohesion through calls, vibrations, or synchronized movement. The herds that left trackways stretching for kilometers were not just walking together by coincidence. They were communicating, adjusting pace and direction in a fluid choreography that spoke of cooperation. But every life, even one of constant motion, needs rest. How did a creature that slept in a world of predators find safety in slumber? The answer, perhaps, lies in modern analogues. Crocodiles rest with one eye open, while some birds and marine mammals use unihemispheric sleep, allowing one half of the brain to rest while the other stays alert. Dinosaurs, sharing ancestry with both groups, may have evolved similar strategies. Smaller species might have slept hidden in burrows or vegetation, while larger ones simply relied on size and herd vigilance. In 2004, paleontologists discovered a fossil of a small theropod curled in a sleeping posture remarkably similar to that of modern birds, head tucked under its forelimb, body curved gently. It is a moment of ancient tenderness frozen in stone, a reminder that even the distant past had its quiet hours. Daily life for dinosaurs, like any creature, revolved around energy. Foraging required timing and temperature awareness. Warm mornings might bring active feeding, while the heat of midday sent animals seeking shade or water. Large-bodied species could maintain stable internal temperatures simply through mass, a phenomenon known as thermal inertia, while smaller ones had to rely on behaviour, basking to warm up, sheltering to cool down. The Jurassic and Cretaceous worlds offered plenty of variation. Open floodplains, dense forests, and shifting coastal lagoons, each demanding its own routine. We can still see these rhythms preserved in the chemistry of fossil bones, where seasonal variations in isotopes record changes in diet and temperature. It is the closest thing to a fossilized calendar of daily habits. There's a temptation to picture dinosaurs as alien or remote, but the truth is that much of their behavior feels familiar. They nested, they cared for their young, they formed herds and families, they called to one another across open land. They sensed danger, sought comfort, and, at least for a moment, closed their eyes to sleep. They were participants in the same grand experiment of life that continues today. And though our evidence is fragmentary, eggshells, footprints, brain casts, and bones, it is enough to sketch the outline of a living world full of intelligence, instinct, and connection. What the fossils cannot show, the imagination can gently fill. The low hum of communication within a herd, the rustle of hatchlings in ferns, the distant, reassuring sound of a parent's footsteps. These are not fantasies, but echoes of truths written softly into stone. In the end, studying how dinosaurs lived day to day reminds us that the extraordinary often hides within the ordinary. Their world was not just one of epic hunts and roaring giants, but of care, awareness, and rest. A full circle of life repeated across millions of years. Even the most fearsome among them needed to pause, breathe, and trust the world to turn while they slept beneath ancient stars. The skin of a dinosaur was never just a covering. It was a living toolkit. It regulated temperature, displayed colour, protected against predators, and sometimes even told stories of health and strength. Beneath the scales, filaments, and feathers lay one of evolution's most expressive canvases. For all their size and strength, dinosaurs were also artists of appearance. Their bodies shimmered, glowed, and shifted with age and season, turning the ancient landscape into a living gallery of textures and tones. When people first imagined dinosaurs, they pictured leathery reptilian hides, green and grey, like giant crocodiles. But over the past few decades, fossils have rewritten that vision. Evidence now shows that the integument of dinosaurs was astonishingly diverse. Some were armoured with bony plates called osteoderms, like built-in shields beneath the skin. Others were covered in pebbly scales, tough but flexible, perfect for surviving sun and abrasion. And then there were the feathered ones, whose bodies carried filaments ranging from simple fuzz to complex plumes, indistinguishable from those of modern birds. Even some species far from the bird lineage sported hair-like filaments, suggesting that insulation and display evolved more than once. The age of reptiles, it turns out, was also the age of texture. Feathers themselves were evolutionary masterpieces. The earliest were likely simple, hollow tubes, insulating filaments that trapped warmth. Over millions of years, these filaments branched and flattened, forming the familiar veined feathers we know today. At first, they may have served only for temperature control or camouflage, but later they became tools for communication and even flight. Some species, like Microraptor, wore shimmering iridescent feathers across 4 wings, gliding silently between Jurassic trees. Others flaunted extravagant crests or tail fans that rivaled a peacock's in complexity. Feathers evolved not in a single leap but through countless small refinements, each adding new function to form. Evolution, it seems, never wastes a good idea, it just keeps improving the prototype. Colour was another frontier of discovery. For years, scientists could only speculate about dinosaur hues, but with the advent of powerful microscopes, researchers began finding tiny pigment-bearing structures, melanosomes, preserved within fossilized feathers and skin. Their shapes and arrangements revealed specific colors, much like the pixels on a digital screen. Round melanosomes indicated reddish-brown tones. Elongated ones pointed to blacks or iridescent sheens. Combined with the chemistry of trace metals, these microstructures allowed scientists to reconstruct the palettes of creatures long vanished. Some dinosaurs were likely muted, blending into forests or riverbanks with shades of brown, green, and grey. Others, like the small feathered Anchiornis, bore splashes of white, rust, and black, perhaps for signalling or species recognition. For the first time, paleontology began to recover not just the shapes of the past, but its colours. Colour, of course, was rarely just decoration. It had purpose. In the intense light of the Mesozoic sun, appearance carried information, warnings, invitations, or camouflage. Bright crests or patterned feathers could signal maturity or fitness to potential mates. Stripes and mottled patterns could confuse predators or break up outlines in shadowy forests. Some species might have shifted shades seasonally, adopting duller tones in nesting periods or shedding their brightest plumes when camouflage mattered most. The possibilities are endless, because evolution paints with every colour the environment allows. Even iridescence, the play of light on microscopic feather layers, might have shimmered across dinosaur plumage long before birds inherited it. If you picture a Jurassic sunrise glinting off a feathered tail, you wouldn't be far from the truth. But skin and feathers were not only for show, they were engines of thermoregulation. Dinosaurs lived in climates that range from hot deserts to cool polar forests, and their bodies had to manage heat efficiently. Insulating feathers or filamentous coverings helped smaller species retain warmth, while large-bodied giants relied on sheer mass to keep temperatures stable. Some dinosaurs may have evolved vascularized skin patches, areas rich in blood vessels that helped release excess heat, much like the ears of modern elephants. The bony plates of stegosaurs might even have served as radiators, their interiors crisscrossed with blood channels that could warm or cool the body as needed. Skin colour played a role too. Dark tones absorbed warmth during cool mornings, while lighter hues reflected the midday glare. To survive in a world of extremes, every surface mattered. The upkeep of these coverings was no small task. Feathers, like hair and skin, wear out. They fray, break, and fade with use. Shedding or molting was likely a regular part of dinosaur life, much as it is for birds today. Seasonal molting might have allowed new plumage to grow in brighter or denser, timed with mating seasons or climate cycles. Scales, too, renewed themselves. Some species likely shed in patches, others in full sheets. This constant renewal ensured that the skin remained an effective barrier, flexible, protective, and responsive to the environment. Growth lines in bones show that many dinosaurs experienced seasonal slowdowns, which might have coincided with these maintenance cycles. Even in deep time, self-care was part of survival. Predator pressure added another layer of innovation. While feathers and filaments offered warmth and display, other dinosaurs evolved defenses written directly into their skin. Ankylosaurs became armoured tanks, covered in fused plates and spikes. Ceratopsians, with their great frills and horns, combined protection with display, a warning and a billboard at once. Even smaller species developed scaly textures thick enough to resist bites or scratches. Yet armour always came with trade-offs. Heavily plated animals sacrifice speed and flexibility, relying on low centres of gravity and stubborn endurance instead. Lighter-skinned species, by contrast, gambled on agility, trusting motion and alertness over shields. The fossil record is full of these compromises. Skin thick enough to deflect claws, but flexible enough to breathe. The line between display and survival often blurred. A horn that began as a defensive weapon might later become a mating signal. A feather pattern that once hid a hatchling might, in a different context, attract a partner. Evolution is thrifty. It recycles designs endlessly, finding new uses for old features. Many dinosaurs likely wore coats that communicated multiple messages at once. Stay back, come closer. I am healthy, I am strong. What began as function became expression, and so, in the age of reptiles, the world was anything but drab. Forests shimmered with movement and colour, bright crests flashing through ferns, patterned hides gliding over mossy ground, the iridescence of feathers catching sunlight before fading back into shadow. Skin and scales reflected not just biology but story, survival, attraction, age, and identity. When we look at the fossils today, we see impressions, outlines, and pigment ghosts. but we can still sense the vibrancy that once was. To imagine these creatures in full colour is to restore something vital to their reality. They were not static relics or uniform shapes, but living, breathing spectacles of adaptation. Their coverings were both armour and art, part shield, part advertisement, and part thermometer. In every patch of scale or feather lay the history of a world that balanced beauty and necessity with quiet perfection. And though time has turned their colours to dust, the idea that they once shimmered under ancient suns remains one of the most elegant truths science has ever uncovered. The world of the dinosaurs did not stay the same forever. Beneath the steady rhythm of the Mesozoic, quiet revolutions were taking shape, none louder, ultimately, than the arrival of flowers. For over 100 million years, the planet's greenery had been ruled by gymnosperms, conifers, cycads, and ginkgos that spread their pollen on the wind, patient and ancient. But sometime during the Cretaceous period, a new kind of plant appeared, one that would remake ecosystems from the roots up. These were the angiosperms, the flowering plants, and they changed everything. At first glance, flowers seemed like decoration, delicate, fleeting, ornamental. Yet biologically they were one of the most radical inventions in Earth's history. Before them, reproduction for most plants was a game of chance. Clouds of pollen drifted on the air, with only a small fraction ever finding its mark. Angiosperms refined this process into a partnership. They lured animals, especially insects, to become couriers of life. Nectar, colour, and scent became the tools of seduction. Petals and patterns evolved not for beauty but for precision, a system designed to move pollen exactly where it needed to go. It was efficiency disguised as elegance. The early Cretaceous world would have smelled and sounded different from the one that came before. Bees, wasps, beetles, and flies diversified rapidly alongside the new flora. Each group specialised in particular shapes, colours, and fragrances. Insects that once fed on spores or leaves now drank sugar-rich nectar and carried pollen dusted across their bodies. Fossilised flowers preserved in amber still carry these early pollinators frozen mid-visit. Snapshots of one of the most successful collaborations in evolutionary history. Coevolution tuned every detail. The timing of blooms, the shape of petals, even the chemistry of scent molecules. Each new plant brought an opportunity, and insects responded in kind, evolving longer mouth parts, better senses, and more complex behaviours. The world began to hum a little louder, its rhythms guided by wings and petals rather than wind alone. For the animals that ate plants, the changes were just as profound. Gymnosperms had offered tough, fibrous leaves, high in cellulose and resin. They were food for large stomachs and long digestive tracts, the kind found in sauropods and other slow grazers. But flowering plants produced something new, tender leaves, fruits and seeds, rich in energy but laced with chemical defences. To eat them required adaptation. Herbivorous dinosaurs evolved more complex teeth, broad, ridged surfaces suited to grinding. Their jaws became more flexible, their chewing more efficient. Even their guts likely evolved microbial communities capable of breaking down new compounds. Every bite of a flowering plant was a small chemical negotiation, a constant dance between toxin and tolerance. Seeds themselves were transformed by this floral revolution. Gymnosperm seeds were exposed, housed in cones or simple casings, relying mostly on gravity or wind for dispersal. Angiosperms began packaging their offspring in layers of nutrition and protection, what we now call fruit. This was evolution's version of marketing. Fruits attracted animals to eat them, ensuring that seeds would be carried away and deposited elsewhere, often complete with a ready-made fertilizer supply. The strategy worked so well that within tens of millions of years, flowering plants had spread across nearly every continent. Birds, mammals, and even reptiles took part in the bargain. The landscape turned from green and brown to a mosaic of colours and scents, each signalling opportunity to whoever could interpret it. As flowering plants spread, they also changed the soil beneath them. Their leaves decomposed faster than those of the older conifers, feeding microbes and enriching the earth with nutrients. The increased turnover of organic matter sped up the cycling of carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus through ecosystems. Litter on the forest floor became thinner, but more fertile. This shift had a ripple effect on everything else. Faster plant growth supported more herbivores, which in turn supported more predators. Even fire responded. With more frequent dieback and thinner litter, wildfires became both more common and more manageable, clearing space for new growth instead of burning entire regions to ash. Fire, in a sense, became part of the garden's rhythm. This new vegetation also changed the structure of habitats. Before angiosperms, forests were dominated by towering conifers with sparse undergrowth, creating shaded, open landscapes. Flowering plants filled the middle layers, shrubs, vines, and smaller trees that wove denser, more intricate environments. Suddenly there were more edges, boundaries between light and shadow, between forest and clearing, between water and land. Each of these edges created opportunities for specialization. Some creatures adapted to life in the canopy, others to the crowded understory. Insects, small reptiles, and mammals all found niches to exploit. The world grew not just greener but more three-dimensional. Complexity was the new normal, and with complexity came subtle competition. Angiosperms did not simply replace gymnosperms overnight. For millions of years they coexisted, dividing the landscape according to climate and soil. Conifers continued to dominate colder or drier regions, while flowering plants expanded into warmer, wetter zones. In time, however, the balance tipped. Faster reproduction, flexible growth forms, and the ability to thrive in disturbed environments gave angiosperms the advantage. They turned every landslide, floodplain, and fire scar into a nursery. Their adaptability was their superpower. They could grow as towering trees, creeping vines, floating lilies, or tiny ground herbs. Life had never been so versatile. The rise of flowering plants also meant a rise in beauty, at least from a human perspective. For the first time, the planet's landscapes would have been bright with colour. Purples, yellows, reds, and blues blooming across plains and valleys. Petals evolved to catch the eye, even if the eyes belonged to bees rather than people. The interplay of light, pollination, and reproduction turned the earth into something almost theatrical. Each flower a signal, each insect a messenger, each gust of wind part of the performance. Though we arrived tens of millions of years too late to see it, this was when the modern world's aesthetic truly began. It's easy to overlook flowers because they seem gentle, but they were quiet disruptors. They accelerated evolution, strengthened food webs, and reshaped entire ecosystems. By creating partnerships rather than relying solely on chance, they made life more interconnected. Every pollinator and fruit eater became part of a grander network, bound by trade and reciprocity. And through those exchanges, flowering plants changed not just the surface of the earth, but its very chemistry, drawing down carbon, enriching soils, and oxygenating the air. The flowering of the world was both a biological event and a metaphor for renewal. It showed that progress need not roar or trample. Sometimes it blooms. From the simplest blossom came the seeds of future forests, fields, and gardens. The legacy of that transformation surrounds us still, in every tree fruit, every petal, every breath scented by pollen. The dinosaurs may have ruled the earth, but the flowers quietly rewrote its rules, turning the ancient conifer-shadowed world into something far more colourful, intricate, and alive. Every so often, the continents forget their edges. In certain eras, when climate warms and polar ice melts, the oceans creep inland, swallowing valleys and turning vast plains into shallow seas. During the time of the dinosaurs, this happened again and again. Inland waters spread across what are now North America, Europe and Asia, forming warm, sunlit basins that shimmered with life. These epicontinental seas, rarely more than a few hundred meters deep, became some of the most productive ecosystems Earth has ever known. When continents drown, new food webs bloom. Imagine standing on a Cretaceous shoreline where Kansas now lies. The horizon stretches unbroken, a calm, glittering expanse of salt water, dotted with drifting debris and the occasional shadow of something large below. This was the Western Interior Seaway, a body of water that once split North America in two. It connected the Arctic Ocean to the Gulf of Mexico, and for millions of years it pulsed like a living artery through the continent. Warm, nutrient-rich, and constantly replenished by rivers, it was a nursery for life. Its shallows teemed with plankton, its deeper regions with graceful giants, and its surface was patrolled by flying reptiles with wings as long as small planes. These inland seas were ideal for plankton, tiny, floating plants and animals that captured sunlight and turned it into chemical energy. Each droplet of water was a miniature factory, converting the sun's warmth into food for the rest of the ecosystem. From this invisible base rose entire pyramids of life. Small fish grazed on plankton, larger fish hunted them, marine reptiles fed on both. Everything depended on the light that filtered through the waves, and as it dimmed with depth, the cast of characters changed. The top few meters glittered with photosynthesis, while below, in the green twilight, hunters cruised in silence, guided by senses tuned to darkness. Among these hunters were the plesiosaurs and mosasaurs, the twin empires of the Mesozoic seas. Though they shared the same environment, their designs told different evolutionary stories. Plesiosaurs were older, descendants of the earlier nothosaurs that had first tested the oceans in the Triassic. Their bodies were elegant and streamlined, with 4 powerful flippers that worked in synchrony, propelling them through the water like flying turtles. Some species had long serpentine necks, perfect for darting into shoals of fish or surprising squid-like prey. Others evolved shorter necks and massive jaws, turning them into pursuit predators built for strength rather than reach. Their motion through water was graceful, more ballet than brawl. Mosasaurs arrived later and took a different path. They were true lizards, distant relatives of monitor species, and they transformed themselves into serpentine torpedoes. Their limbs became flippers, their tails developed crescent-shaped fins, and their jaws hinged with terrifying flexibility. They were fast, muscular, and highly adaptable, some reaching lengths of over 15 meters. Unlike the gentle glide of plesiosaurs, mosasaurs powered through the water with lateral sweeps of their tails, much like sharks. Their teeth were sharp and conical, built to seize and crush, and their double-hinged jaws allowed them to swallow large prey whole. In the open waters of the late Cretaceous, they became the apex predators, the undisputed rulers of the inland seas. Between the plankton at the bottom and these leviathans at the top lay a vast and intricate food web. Schools of fish, ammonites, and smaller reptiles formed the middle layers, moving like shimmering clouds through the water. Seabirds skimmed the surface, diving for flashes of silver beneath the waves. The balance between predator and prey was delicate but stable, maintained by abundance. When the seas were warm and plankton flourished, the entire system pulsed with life. When climate shifted or nutrients ran low, everything from the smallest copepod to the largest mosasaur felt the consequences. It was an energy staircase, each step built on the one below. a reminder that even the fiercest hunter is only as strong as the plankton it indirectly depends on. The fossil record of these seas offers an exceptional window into how life and death interacted in water. In calm conditions, a carcass might drift downward intact, settling gently onto the seafloor to be buried in fine sediment. But in stormier times, waves and currents tore bodies apart, scattering bones across vast distances. Sometimes multiple skeletons accumulated in depressions or channels, forming bone beds that mark ancient storm events. This process, taphonomy, the study of how organisms decay and become fossils, shows that chance often decided who would be remembered. A plesiosaur that sank in still water could be preserved in exquisite detail, while another, torn apart by scavengers or waves, might leave only a few lonely vertebrae to hint at its existence. Storms were the sculptors of these ecosystems. Seasonal changes in temperature and pressure could trigger monsoons and tempests that swept across the inland seas, churning up nutrients from the depths and redistributing life. These pulses of disturbance may have guided migration patterns, drawing creatures toward calmer bays or shallower nursery zones. Plesiosaurs might have followed fish shoals inland after storms, while mosasaurs patrolled the deeper channels where currents brought in carcasses and new prey. Each change in weather restructured the entire community, life moving in synchrony with the water's moods. The light itself played a central role in shaping who lived where. The upper layers of the sea were brilliant and full of colour, home to plankton, fish, and hunters who relied on sharp vision. Below, the light faded into a green dusk. Here, creatures adapted with larger eyes, sensitive lateral lines, and acute hearing. Plesiosaurs' large eye sockets hint at hunting in dim light or murky shallows, while some mosasaurs may have relied on pressure detection to sense movement around them. In the deepest regions where the sun barely reached, life slowed to a whisper, scavengers gliding through darkness, cleaning up what drifted down from above. The gradient from surface to sea floor was a vertical ecosystem, layered like an orchestra, each depth with its own instruments and tempo. And yet, for all their power, these seas were fragile. A shift in sea level could drain entire basins. A change in climate could collapse the plankton blooms on which everything depended. When the Cretaceous ended, so too did the inland seas. They retreated with the lowering of global waters, leaving behind the fossils that now lie beneath deserts and prairies. The bones of marine reptiles, ammonites, and fish turned to stone where waves once lapped. The rock record remembers them not as isolated skeletons, but as echoes of a vanished ocean world. A world that had once shimmered with light and motion, where now only dust remains. It's remarkable to think that places like modern Kansas or Alberta were once seabeds alive with sharks, reptiles, and ammonites spiraling through the blue. These epicontinental seas were reminders that Earth's boundaries are temporary, that land and ocean are in constant conversation. Every time the planet breathes warm, the seas return to reclaim the lowlands, rewriting the map and filling the shallows with new life. The story of those drowned continents is not one of loss, but of renewal, a cycle where retreat and return feed the endless creativity of evolution. By the late Cretaceous, the skies belonged to the pterosaurs, from delicate sparrow-sized gliders to giants that could cast shadows over rivers. These masters of air had perfected the art of flight. They'd started humbly, small, fuzzy, and fragile, but over millions of years they grew into the largest flying animals the planet has ever known. They filled every aerial niche, soaring across coastlines, deserts, and inland seas. Where the dinosaurs ruled the land, the pterosaurs ruled the wind. The largest of them, creatures like Quetzalcoatlus and Hatzegopteryx, were almost beyond belief. With wingspans that may have stretched over 10 meters, they stood taller than a human even when folded on the ground. Yet for all that size, they were light as possible. living studies in aerodynamic compromise. Their bones were hollow and air-filled, reinforced by thin internal struts that gave strength without weight. Engineers today still marvel at their design. The ratio of wing area to body mass, known as wing loading, was finely tuned, high enough for stability, low enough to allow takeoff. They didn't flap constantly like small birds. Instead, they used the atmosphere's structure itself as their partner, turning sunlight and wind into invisible pathways of motion. A single flap might be followed by minutes of effortless gliding. In the language of flight physics, they were built not for speed but for efficiency, masters of distance over duration. The question of how such massive animals got airborne has fascinated scientists for decades. A standing start might seem impossible, yet fossilized bone structure and biomechanics offer elegant answers. Pterosaurs were not bipeds like birds, but quadrupeds, using both forelimbs and hind limbs to launch. In an explosive motion, they planted all four limbs, vaulted upward, and unfurled their wings in midair, a maneuver known as the quadrupedal catapult. The power of that motion, combined with their lightweight skeletons and muscular forelimbs, gave them enough thrust to clear the ground even from flat terrain. From cliffs or slopes, the launch was as easier still. Gravity became an ally, providing the momentum needed to catch the first thermal. Whether they lived near coasts, deserts, or inland lakes, the physics was always the same. Every takeoff a small miracle of coordination and trust in the wind. Once aloft, their flight bordered on poetry. Fossil evidence suggests they were skilled at exploiting the planet's invisible weather architecture. Coastal thermals rising over beaches, desert updrafts shimmering in the heat, and mountain lee waves curling through the air like ribbons. In these conditions, a pterosaur could travel extraordinary distances without flapping much at all. Some scientists estimate that the largest species could have crossed oceans using columns of rising air like stepping stones. Smaller forms likely stayed closer to shorelines and river deltas, where insects and fish were plentiful. The sky, like the ocean below, was layered. Different altitudes held different communities, each one tuned to its own wind patterns and prey. But flight was only part of their story. Pterosaurs were also creatures of colour and display, their bodies covered in thin hair-like filaments, called pycnofibers, that likely provided insulation, and, in some species, patterning. Many bore elaborate crests rising from their skulls, structures of bone and soft tissue that could reach remarkable proportions. These were not just aerodynamic ornaments, they were billboards of identity. Some species may have used them to attract mates, others to signal age, health, or dominance. The variety is staggering. Tall sails, backward curves, triangular fins, even asymmetrical shapes that seem to defy logic, but make perfect sense as signals in motion. The fossil record even hints at colour patterns on these crests, dark patches and banded contrasts that might have glowed in sunlight. Imagine a line of pterosaurs gliding at dusk, their crests catching the light like stained glass. Not every crest was built for show. Some may have served as stabilizers, balancing airflow or helping steer in complex currents. As with so many traits in evolution, form often served multiple functions. A crest that began as a heat regulator or aerodynamic aid could later evolve into a social signal. It's evolutionary thrift at its finest, recycling old ideas for new purposes, much like feathers did in dinosaurs. By the Cretaceous, pterosaurs shared the sky with birds, and the two groups found ways to coexist rather than compete. Birds were generally smaller, faster, and better suited for flapping flight in forests or over short ranges. Pterosaurs dominated the open spaces, broad coastlines, inland seas, and vast desert thermals. Some may have been diurnal, soaring in the heat of midday when air currents were strongest. while others likely preferred twilight, when cooler layers of air made for smooth gliding. Their diets reflected this partitioning too. Birds snatched insects and small prey in bursts of agility, while pterosaurs took fish, carrion, or even small dinosaurs from beaches and estuaries. The sky was not a battlefield but a shared layered ecosystem, each flyer occupying its own invisible corridor. Life in the air is demanding, and the pterosaur body was both robust and delicate. Their pneumatic bones, hollow, filled with air sacs, made them superb flyers but also vulnerable to damage. Yet the evidence suggests they could repair themselves remarkably well. Fossils show healed fractures, implying that even after injury these creatures could survive and return to flight. Their metabolism, likely high and efficient, supported rapid bone growth and regeneration. Over a lifetime, a large pterosaur might weather dozens of minor breaks or strains, each leaving a faint record of endurance. Their bodies were built not only for grace, but for recovery. Juveniles, too, were born ready to fly. Some hatchlings, preserved with well-developed wings, suggest that pterosaurs were precocial. They could glide almost immediately after hatching. Imagine cliffsides alive with movement, young gliders testing their wings in gentle updrafts while adults circled above. The learning curve was literal. The sky itself was the classroom. Over time, those fledglings would join the adults in long migrations, riding the same winds that had shaped their ancestors for over 100 million years. To live one's life suspended between sea and sky must have been a kind of freedom few creatures have known. From a pterosaur's vantage point, the world below, lush forests, sunlit lagoons, herds of dinosaurs moving across plains, was a shifting tapestry of motion and light. Theirs was not a life of noise or frenzy, but of quiet mastery, a balance of physics, instinct, and wind. When they finally vanished at the end of the Cretaceous, the skies fell silent in a way they never had before. Birds survived, inheriting much of their aerial kingdom, but the pterosaurs took with them an entire branch of nature's imagination. They proved that flight could be achieved not by feathers or magic, but by structure, patience, and a deep partnership with the air itself. Even now their bones seem impossibly light, their forms impossibly bold, and somewhere in every passing seabird, in every glider catching a thermal, a small echo of their genius still soars. The climate of the Mesozoic is often remembered for its extremes: volcanic heat, sudden shifts, long droughts, and deluges. But for most creatures who lived through it, weather was not catastrophe, it was rhythm. The dinosaurs, plants, and reptiles of that age did not live in a world perpetually on the brink of disaster. They lived in one that breathed, slowly, steadily, and predictably in its own vast tempo. The warmth, the rains, the winds, and even the storms were part of a pattern that shaped every route, every migration, every generation. To understand those rhythms today, scientists listen to the rocks. The Earth keeps diaries everywhere it can, written in layers and chemistry. In ancient lake beds, sediments formed annual laminations, light and dark bands known as varves. Each pair marked a single year, the light layer of summer silt, the dark of winter calm. Counting them is like reading a prehistoric calendar. Tree rings tell similar stories. Yes, there were trees during the time of the dinosaurs, conifers, cycads, and ginkgos, and their wood records the pulse of the seasons. Wider rings mark years of warmth and plenty. Narrow rings betray drought or cold snaps. Even isotopes, the subtle variations in oxygen and carbon atoms, preserve whispers of rainfall and temperature locked within fossil shells and minerals. Together, these clues reveal not chaos but repetition. the reliable turning of wet to dry, cool to warm, life to rest and back again. Of course, patterns don't mean comfort. The Mesozoic's climates could swing between generosity and hardship, especially across the vast interiors of continents. When the monsoons failed or rivers retreated, drought tightened its grip. Herds of herbivores, dependent on vegetation, would have been forced to wander, following the shrinking green corridors along river valleys. Fossil trackways sometimes show lines of prints that stretch for kilometers, perhaps migration trails carved by thirst and necessity. Then, as suddenly as it began, the drought would break. Rains would return in furious abundance, swelling rivers, flooding plains and filling lakes that had lain cracked and silent. Each flood reset the landscape, washing away nests, reshaping soils, and starting the cycle anew. These alternating rhythms of scarcity and plenty forged resilience into every species that endured them. The winds too left their mark. Across what are now deserts and arid basins, fossilized dunes stand frozen in stone, their cross-bedded layers preserving the angles of ancient breezes. From their shapes, geologists can tell the direction and strength of prevailing winds, reading the planet's long-forgotten weather maps. Fine dust from these deserts travelled vast distances, settling in layers of loess that record atmospheric circulation like fingerprints. These dust corridors carried nutrients as well, iron and phosphorus, ingredients for ocean plankton blooms that tied the winds of the land to the life of the sea. The atmosphere was not a static background, but a living conveyor, moving energy and matter between continents. Even the dinosaurs would have felt it, the steady push of seasonal winds, the scent of rain carried from far away. Storms were part of the pulse too, and their signatures still lie hidden in the rocks. In the sediments of shallow seas, scientists have found layers that speak of ancient hurricanes. Beds of broken shells, coarse sand, and scattered debris sandwiched between calmer deposits. Each storm left a fingerprint, reshaping coastlines and clearing the stage for recovery. These tempestites, as they're called, show that even the mightiest disruptions were woven into the planet's long-term balance. Along coastal plains, hurricanes could have acted as gardeners, uprooting forests and redistributing nutrients, giving pioneer plants room to grow. For marine life, they brought surges of oxygen and fresh sediment that nourished plankton blooms. The storms were destructive, but also regenerative, reminders that disturbance is part of continuity. Above and beneath all this daily weather, deeper rhythms played out, those of the Earth itself. Over millions of years, volcanic cycles released carbon dioxide into the air, warming the climate and altering the chemistry of the oceans. These were not short-lived eruptions, but grand, slow exhalations of the planet. Lava fields like the Central Atlantic Magmatic Province or the Deccan Traps poured out not over days but over hundreds of thousands of years, each pulse adding heat-trapping gases to the sky. In response, vegetation and oceans acted as absorbers, drawing carbon back down through photosynthesis and mineral reactions. The balance wavered but never broke entirely. Through this long conversation between fire and air, life adapted. Tropical belts expanded, polar regions remained mild, and rainforests crept toward the poles. The world was warm, sometimes uncomfortably so, but stable enough for evolution to flourish. Creatures of the Mesozoic were not passive observers of their weather, they were active participants. Behavioral adaptation was their buffer against change. Some dug burrows to escape the heat or to wait out dry spells. Others took shelter under vegetation or used the shade of their own herds. Large dinosaurs, with their immense thermal mass, were walking climate systems unto themselves, warming slowly, cooling slowly, and relying on behavior more than biology to regulate their temperatures. Smaller species likely adjusted their daily routines, feeding at dawn or dusk to avoid the harshest sun. In cooler periods, they may have basked on rocks or in shallow pools, just as reptiles do today. The Earth offered many climates, but it was behavior that decided survival. Even plants responded to these rhythms with quiet precision. Conifers shed cones and needles in tune with moisture cycles. Ferns unfurled fronds after floods. The chemistry of leaves changed with temperature, altering how they reflected light and stored carbon. In each adjustment, there was a story of partnership between organism and atmosphere, between life and time. When we picture the Mesozoic climate, it's tempting to imagine endless heat, but it wasn't uniform. Polar regions saw long twilight winters but rarely froze. Rain belts migrated north and south like breathing lungs. Storms came and went, deserts expanded and contracted. Yet through it all, the Earth maintained its poise. The same forces that occasionally tipped it toward catastrophe, volcanism, shifting continents, and greenhouse gases, also sustained its fertility. The dinosaurs did not live in a perpetual summer so much as in a world of dependable cycles, where even extremes followed rules. To walk that world would have been to feel constant motion, the soft press of wind, the hum of insects before rain, the smell of ozone from distant storms. It was a planet alive not only with creatures, but with climate itself. The air was a teacher, and everything that lived learned its lessons: when to move, when to rest, when to seek shade, when to sing. The Mesozoic atmosphere was not a backdrop for evolution. It was a participant breathing in step with the life it sustained. And in many ways, it still does. Every gust of wind, every summer drought or winter rain, is part of the same long conversation that began hundreds of millions of years ago. The rhythms have changed, but the music continues, slow, patient, and endlessly creative. Beneath the thunder of dinosaurs and the sweep of pterosaurs, the Mesozoic world was alive with smaller rhythms, quieter hearts beating in the shadows. In the leaf litter, in the hollows of trees and under the soil, mammals had already arrived. They were not the giants of the future, but the survivors of the present, tiny, agile, and endlessly inventive. Their lives were measured not in roars but in whispers, in the scratch of paws through moss and the soft rustle of nocturnal foraging. To most of their towering contemporaries they were invisible. Yet these small creatures carried the seeds of tomorrow's world in their fur and their bones. The early mammals of the Mesozoic were creatures of adaptation. They had fur to insulate their small bodies, high metabolic rates to keep their temperature steady, and finely tuned senses that let them navigate the night. Their skulls show enlarged brain cases and delicate inner ear bones, the hallmarks of sharp hearing. Some likely had whiskers to feel their way through tunnels and dense vegetation. Many dug burrows not only for safety but for climate control. Underground, temperatures stayed stable, moisture lingered, and predators' footfalls were muffled. Burrows were more than shelters. They were thermostats, nurseries, and sometimes even social spaces. Living in the shadow of giants required strategy. Daytime belonged to dinosaurs, whose bulk and strength ruled the open landscapes. Mammals adapted by claiming the hours between dusk and dawn. In the soft light of a Mesozoic night, they hunted insects, gathered seeds, and scavenged leftovers from the great reptiles' meals. These nocturnal economies were quieter, but no less complex. Vision shifted toward larger pupils and rod-rich retinas for low-light sight, while smell and hearing became the dominant ways of sensing the world. The world after sunset belonged to whispers, the click of insect wings, the rustle of leaves, the faint pulse of life beneath the stars. Because they were small, mammals could exploit niches that larger creatures ignored. Some climbed trees or scurried through undergrowth, others swam in streams or glided between branches. Fossils reveal astonishing diversity. Insect eaters with precise, interlocking teeth, omnivores with flexible diets, burrowers with powerful limbs, and even early gliders with membranes stretched between elongated fingers. These experiments in form show that mammals were not waiting for the dinosaurs to vanish before evolving. They were already rehearsing for the Cenozoic. Evolution had given them every toolkit: fur, milk, parental care, and warm blood. All they needed was an opportunity to expand. Patterns of convergence tell the same story. Across different mammal lineages, similar solutions appeared again and again. Streamlined bodies for swimming, spines for digging, membranes for gliding. Nature, when faced with the same problem, often reaches for the same answer. This is why prehistoric gliders looked oddly familiar, why burrowing mammals resembled modern moles, and why aquatic species echoed the forms of later otters or platypuses. These repeating shapes are not coincidences, they're the geometry of survival. Life keeps rediscovering efficient designs, like a composer returning to a favourite theme. Even with all their innovation, mammals were careful to avoid direct competition with the dominant reptiles. The Mesozoic world was a mosaic of niches divided by time, height, and diet. While sauropods browsed treetops and herbivorous dinosaurs cleared ferns from the ground, mammals fed on insects, fruits, roots, and small invertebrates. Some occupied the twilight spaces between day and night. Others specialized in colder or drier microhabitats where larger reptiles struggled. In ecosystems governed by scale, success often comes from being small enough to go unnoticed. The mammals of this era perfected that art. Their fossils, when found, are often frustratingly delicate. Most of what we know about early mammals comes from tiny teeth and jaw fragments, pieces so small they can hide in a handful of sand. Those teeth, though, are miniature marvels of engineering. Each cusp and ridge tells a story of diet and adaptation. From them, paleontologists can infer not only what these animals ate, but how they lived and moved. Whole worlds of behaviour are hidden in enamel. Yet the fossil record remains biased toward the large and durable. For every mammal jaw we find, there are likely thousands that vanished without a trace. The small are undercounted, but they were never unimportant. Their absence in the rock record is not a reflection of their rarity, but of their fragility. Occasionally a more complete skeleton turns up. Tiny bones still arranged in sleeping posture. Fur imprints fossilized around them. These rare finds give shape to imagination. One can almost picture them nesting together in burrows, grooming their young or curling up for warmth. Such fossils remind us that the Mesozoic was not just an age of giants, but a time of quiet continuity. While dinosaurs evolved spectacle, mammals refined subtlety. Their evolution was an underground symphony, heard only by those close enough to the soil to listen. They were also experimenters in intelligence. Their brains, relative to body size, were already large compared to most reptiles. Complex sensory processing, learning, and perhaps even problem-solving were part of their lives. In a world of immense, slow-moving rulers, the mammals represented speed, not of limb, but of thought. Their nervous systems were agile, their reflexes fine-tuned. The line from these small, bright-eyed survivors to the future primates, bats, and whales is not a leap, but a slow accumulation of subtle advantages. Fur, warmth, and parental care were their insurance policies in a changing world. When drought struck or climates cooled, they could huddle in groups, slow their metabolisms, or wait out hardship underground. This adaptability would later become the foundation of their success. The features that helped them survive among dinosaurs, endurance, flexibility, intelligence, would become the defining strengths of the mammals that inherited the Earth after the Great Extinction. It's easy to overlook their story because it unfolds in miniature. They left no towering skeletons or monumental tracks, only tiny traces of presence. Yet their impact was immense. The mammals of the Mesozoic were the test pilots of the future, quietly perfecting warm-blooded life in a cold-blooded age. When the skies darkened and the age of reptiles ended, they did not need to reinvent themselves. They were already ready, armed with fur, fast metabolisms, and the patience to wait. So much of the Mesozoic was grand, but the mammals remind us that greatness is not always loud. Sometimes it hides under leaves, in burrows, or in the pause between heartbeats. They lived unseen by most eyes, yet their survival ensured that life would continue in new and astonishing forms. The night belonged to them long before the dawn did, and when that dawn finally came, they rose not as newcomers, but as heirs to a story they had been quietly writing all along. For decades, the question of whether dinosaurs were warm-blooded or cold-blooded has flickered through scientific debate like a campfire in the dark. Were they slow, sunbathing reptiles or fast, high-energy creatures closer to birds? The truth, as so often happens in nature, sits comfortably between extremes. The dinosaurs, and many of their contemporaries, lived in a thermal spectrum far more subtle than the binary of hot or cold. They were masters of compromise, balancing energy, growth, and climate in ways that defy easy labels. Clues to this mystery lie deep within the bones themselves. When paleontologists slice thin sections of fossilized bone and examine them under a microscope, they find growth rings and patterns of tissue organization that speak volumes about metabolism. In cold-blooded reptiles, bone tissue tends to form slowly, producing visible, regular bands, each one marking a pause during times of slowed growth. In contrast, the bones of dinosaurs often show fibrolamellar tissue, a texture laid down rapidly and continuously, suggesting fast growth and active metabolisms. Some species appear to have reached near adult size within a decade, an astonishing pace for animals weighing several tons. That kind of biological acceleration demands energy, and energy demands warmth. Whatever their internal mechanisms, these creatures were running hot compared to their reptilian ancestors. Isotopic chemistry adds another layer of insight. Within the mineral structure of fossilized bone and tooth enamel, oxygen and carbon isotopes preserve faint records of temperature and diet. By comparing isotope ratios between species, or even between different parts of the same skeleton, scientists can infer how consistently body temperatures were maintained. The results are intriguing. Many dinosaurs show stable internal temperatures, more like mammals and birds than lizards. Others display a mild variability, suggesting they could let their body heat fluctuate when needed. It paints a picture of organisms with control, but not necessarily constancy. Creatures that could fine-tune their metabolism depending on climate, activity, or food availability. This idea led to the concept of mesothermy, a middle ground between warm-blooded endothermy and cold-blooded ectothermy. Mesothermic animals generate some of their own heat, but do not regulate it as tightly as mammals or birds. They can maintain activity across a wide range of conditions without the constant energy drain of full warm-bloodedness. Tuna, sharks, and leatherback turtles are modern examples. They move fast, range widely, and stay warmer than their surroundings, yet their internal thermostats are flexible. Dinosaurs may have operated under a similar model, a dynamic, energy-efficient physiology that adapted beautifully to a planet in flux. It was the biological equivalent of using both a furnace and a window. Warm when needed, open to the elements when possible. Size itself played a crucial role. Large animals lose heat more slowly than small ones, a phenomenon called thermal inertia. Once a giant sauropod warmed up under the sun, its mass would have kept it at a stable temperature long after nightfall. Its own bulk became a heat reservoir, smoothing out the daily swings that smaller animals had to constantly chase. Smaller dinosaurs, by contrast, likely relied on insulation, feathers or filamentous fuzz, to trap body heat. The fossil record supports this, showing feathery coverings in many theropods and even some herbivorous lineages. Nature used two paths to the same goal: mass and insulation, both serving to keep life running smoothly. The diversity of dinosaur metabolisms likely mirrored their environments. Those living near the equator, where warmth and sunlight were abundant, could afford a looser relationship with body temperature. Energy from the environment helped sustain them. At higher latitudes or elevations, where nights cooled sharply and winters bit harder, species may have evolved tighter thermoregulation, higher resting metabolisms, or denser insulation. Fossilized bone chemistry shows that some dinosaurs lived comfortably near the poles, enduring months of dim light and cool air. They grew and thrived where no modern reptiles could, suggesting a physiology robust enough to cope with long, dark seasons. This balance between metabolism and environment influenced everything from feeding behavior to migration. Animals with higher metabolisms could stay active longer, travel farther, and exploit colder regions. Those with more flexible systems could survive lean times by lowering energy output. Evolution doesn't play favorites. It rewards what works best in the moment. Dinosaurs appear to have mastered the art of thermal adaptability, each lineage finding its own compromise between speed and conservation. Even their growth patterns echo this story. When scientists count the microscopic growth rings inside bones, they find pauses and spurts, not unlike those in trees. These interruptions suggest seasonal slowdowns, perhaps during dry or cold months when food was scarce. But the overall trajectory remained steep, fast, sustained growth, punctuated by brief rests. Some smaller species may have reached maturity within just a few years, while the largest ones grew steadily for decades. This flexibility in growth rate hints at a physiology capable of adjusting output to circumstance, a living balance between ambition and restraint. Of course, not every piece of evidence fits neatly into this framework. Some isotopic data conflict and fossil preservation can blur the signals. It's easy to forget that we are reconstructing body heat from minerals that have been altered for over 60 million years. The best we can do is triangulate, combining histology, chemistry, and modern analogues. Every answer comes with a quiet footnote: inference, not certainty. Yet even with uncertainty, the emerging picture feels coherent. The dinosaurs were neither sluggish lizards nor overclocked mammals. They were something unique, a class of life tuned precisely to the Mesozoic world. In the end, their physiology seems almost poetic, warm enough to move with purpose, cool enough to endure with patience. This middle path may have been their greatest strength. It allowed them to dominate environments ranging from tropical coasts to temperate forests, from deserts to polar plains. Their warmth powered fast growth, sharp senses, and long migrations, while their flexibility made them resilient to climate's moods. If one could have placed a hand on the side of a living sauropod or a feathered raptor, the skin might have felt warm, alive with quiet energy, neither reptilian chill nor mammalian heat. Beneath that warmth beat hearts, calibrated not for excess, but for endurance. In their balance between fire and calm, dinosaurs remind us that nature's most elegant solutions often lie between the lines, not hot or cold, but something perfectly in between. For every bone that time preserves, there are 1,000 quieter stories written in the stone beside it. The earth remembers not only bodies but moments, footsteps, burrows, and even the echoes of ancient digestion. These traces, known as ichnofossils, capture behaviour rather than anatomy. They tell us not what creatures looked like, but what they did, how they moved, where they rested, and even what they ate. To paleontologists, these are not just curiosities. They are windows into vanished lives. The rock record, when read carefully, is less a graveyard and more a diary. Perhaps the most immediately human of these traces are footprints. There's something universal about seeing tracks in mud or sand, the shape of motion frozen in time. For dinosaurs and other Mesozoic animals, trackways are among the richest behavioural records we have. Each set of prints captures a few seconds of life: a walk across a tidal flat, a chase through a riverbank, a moment of hesitation before a turn. From the spacing and depth of the prints, scientists can estimate stride length, body size and speed. A narrow trackway suggests an animal walking with its feet close together, perhaps moving quickly. A wide one may indicate slower, more deliberate motion. Trackway geometry can even reveal social behaviour. Parallel lines of footprints stretching across ancient floodplains suggest herds or family groups moving together. Sometimes, smaller prints weave between larger ones, possibly juveniles walking among adults. One site might show hundreds of parallel tracks, all moving in the same direction, as though a migration were underway. Another might capture confusion, prints crossing at odd angles, the result of panic or pursuit. Each trackway is a short film but without sound or colour. It's up to us to reconstruct the story from the pattern of steps. There's also personality hidden in the details. Some dinosaurs dragged their tails, others lifted them clear of the ground. The angle of the toes, the depth of the heel, and the spacing between strides can hint at whether a creature was cautious, hurried, or simply meandering. In the right conditions, you can even see skin impressions, fine, hexagonal textures that look like the tread of ancient sandals. These delicate features often survive only in a few millimeters of sediment, yet they carry the immediacy of touch across tens of millions of years. While footprints show movement, burrows reveal stillness, the quiet parts of life. Burrows tell stories of safety, temperature control, and sometimes even community. In Mesozoic soils, scientists have discovered networks of tunnels with smooth walls and rounded chambers, some large enough for small dinosaurs or mammals. Others are narrower and more complex, branching like roots. These structures show that digging was not rare. It was a widespread survival strategy. Burrows kept their inhabitants cool during scorching days and warm during cool nights. They shielded eggs, stored food, and offered refuge from predators. Some may have been shared by successive generations, their walls smoothed by years of use. Even in ancient ecosystems, burrows acted as tiny climate regulators. By measuring the spacing and orientation of tunnel layers, geologists can infer how deeply creatures dug to escape surface heat, offering clues about regional temperatures. Some burrows preserve claw marks, showing how the diggers worked. In a few rare cases, skeletons are found curled inside, as though their owners never made it back to the surface. Lives caught mid-hibernation, turned to stone. Such discoveries are bittersweet, evidence of both adaptation and its limits. Then there are the fossils that remind us that every meal leaves a trace. Coprolites, fossilized droppings, might seem like the least glamorous of discoveries, but they are among the most informative. Under a microscope, these humble stones become mosaics of digested history. Fragments of bone, plant tissue, pollen grains, even parasite eggs. From their composition, scientists can reconstruct diets with surprising precision. A carnivore's coprolite might be packed with crushed bone and calcium phosphate, a herbivore's with cellulose and spores. Chemical analyses can reveal the presence of fats, proteins and trace elements, telling us not just what was eaten, but how it was processed. In some cases, coprolites preserve the chemical fingerprints of gut bacteria, giving us a glimpse into ancient microbiomes. Coprolites also place animals within their ecosystems. A single deposit from a large predator can confirm the prey species living nearby. In marine settings, they tell of plankton blooms, fish populations, and even ocean chemistry. They bridge the gap between anatomy and environment, proof that behaviour, biology, and climate were never separate stories. For all their humour potential, coprolites are truly the most democratic of fossils. Everyone contributes to them. Beyond individual traces, there are collective records, bone beds, flood deposits, and mass death assemblages. These sites demand careful detective work. A jumble of bones might at first look like the aftermath of a single disaster, but appearances deceive. Some bone beds formed over decades or centuries, as animals died near the same waterhole or migratory path. Floods could sweep up carcasses, rework them, and deposit them in new layers. Teeth marks, bite fractures, or the orientation of bones can distinguish between a predator's lair, a drought die-off, or a storm surge. Understanding these taphonomic details, the processes that govern burial and decay, allows scientists to separate coincidence from catastrophe. Each site is a puzzle, and context is everything. Even at microscopic scales, the traces continue. Grains of pollen, spores, and tiny shells called foraminifera form vast archives of environmental memory. Under magnification, these microfossils reveal ancient vegetation, seasonal patterns, and shifts in temperature and humidity. By comparing samples from different layers, scientists can reconstruct entire climate sequences. The sudden appearance or disappearance of particular pollen types might mark the rise of flowering plants, or the retreat of forests during drought. In ocean sediments, the chemistry of microshells captures global trends in oxygen and carbon, the breathing of the planet itself. These particles, invisible to the naked eye, are the punctuation marks of deep time. All these clues, tracks, burrows, droppings, and microfossils, share one defining trait. They must be read in chorus, not solo. One piece of evidence can mislead. Several together begin to sing. A trackway might hint at herding, but without bone beds or nesting sites to confirm it, the conclusion remains speculation. A coprolite may tell us what was eaten, but not by whom, unless other clues link it to a species. This is the humility of paleontology, the understanding that fossils tell truth only in numbers. Every claim must rest on converging evidence, or it remains only a beautiful guess. In the end, the traces left behind by ancient life are like echoes fading down a corridor. Each one is faint on its own, but together they form a symphony. Through them we hear the thud of footsteps, the scratching of claws, the hush of creatures settling into burrows, and even the slow chemistry of decay becoming stone. These signals remind us that the past was not a static tableau, but a living, breathing world, full of motion, struggle, and small daily acts that left their imprints in the earth. To read those signals is to bridge an unimaginable span of time. The mud that once squelched beneath dinosaur feet is now a slab on a museum wall. The burrow that held a sleeping mammal is a hollow in a hillside. The droppings of a long-dead predator gleam faintly with minerals under a scientist's light. And yet, despite the eons between us, their world remains legible. The earth remembers every gesture, every footprint, every breath, and waits patiently for us to notice. In the final chapters of the Mesozoic, the world was full and vibrant, more diverse than ever before. The continents had drifted far from their Triassic unity. The climate had softened into warm regional rhythms, and ecosystems pulsed with complexity. It was a time of equilibrium that only looks fragile in hindsight. To those who lived in it, the late Cretaceous must have felt eternal. a world of great rivers, endless greenery, and creatures perfectly matched to their surroundings. It was the long sunset of the dinosaurs, golden and abundant, unaware that the horizon was already darkening. The landscape itself was lush and alive. Much of what is now North America was divided by a broad inland sea, bordered by fertile coastal plains and tangled river deltas. The air shimmered with humidity, and the ground was a patchwork of forests, floodplains, and shallow lakes. Deltas and estuaries teemed with life. Fish, turtles, and crocodiles beneath the surface, birds, insects, and small mammals along the edges. Farther inland, forests of flowering plants and conifers stretched toward distant volcanoes that sometimes blurred the sky with ash. It was a world that had learned balance, warm, wet, and deeply productive. Every inch of it hummed with energy, and in that abundance lived an extraordinary caste. Towering over it all were the titanosaurs, the last of the great sauropods, whose columned legs and sweeping tails traced slow paths across floodplains. Their bodies were living ecosystems, hosting clouds of insects and flocks of birds that picked parasites from their hides. Sharing the plains with them were herds of hadrosaurs, the duck-billed dinosaurs, whose grinding teeth and plant-processing jaws made them the lawnmowers of their age. Some had elaborate crests that may have resonated like brass instruments, allowing them to call across the open plains in low, vibrating tones. Alongside them moved the ceratopsians, crowned with horns and frills in dazzling variety. These were social, powerful animals, forming defensive circles when threatened, their horns glinting in the sun like spears. And then there were the predators, the tyrannosaurs, apex hunters of their time, ruled with calculated precision. Far from mindless brutes, they were complex animals, keen-sensed, patient, and intelligent enough to read the movements of herds. Their bite force could crush bone, but their success came as much from timing as from power. Juveniles may have filled separate ecological roles, darting and swift, while adults dominated the slower ambushes. Around them prowled smaller hunters, dromaeosaurs with feathered limbs and clever eyes, pack hunters that filled the gaps left between the giants. This late-stage ecosystem was a web of interdependence, where no creature stood alone for long. The plants of this world were in full bloom, literally. Angiosperms had completed their quiet revolution, carpeting the earth with flowering diversity. Pollinators thrived in this explosion of opportunity. Beetles, flies, and early bees formed intricate relationships with specific blooms, carrying pollen from one flower to the next with mathematical precision. The result was a biosphere that ran on sweetness. Nectar, fruit, and seeds became new forms of currency. Small mammals and birds fed on these rich resources, spreading seeds in return. Every petal and every wing beat was part of a vast exchange network that linked forest canopy to soil. It was an age where beauty and efficiency had merged into a single, seamless process. The variety of habitats made life endlessly adaptable. Along the coasts, herds migrated with the seasons, following vegetation as water levels rose and fell. Nesting grounds became annual traditions, open floodplains dotted with hundreds of shallow pits, where hadrosaurs or ceratopsians laid their eggs in collective safety. Fossilized nesting sites show careful arrangement, eggs spaced evenly, layers of plant matter cushioning the young. Some adults likely guarded these colonies, driving off predators or shading the nests with their bodies. The fossil record of tracks and bones around these sites reads like a community story. Life built not on solitude, but on shared rhythms of reproduction and care. Even predators were part of these cycles. Tyrannosaurs shadowed the great herds, not in constant pursuit but in patient anticipation. They likely followed migrations, picking off the weak or the lost, shaping the herd's movements without destroying them. Predators and prey existed in a dynamic equilibrium, each ensuring the other's persistence. The ecosystem was so finely tuned that every loss found balance. When a river shifted course or a volcano reshaped the land, life adapted within decades. Diversity was its shield against disaster, yet beneath this harmony lay quiet fragility. The very richness of the system depended on stability, steady climates, predictable rains and fertile plains. Subtle changes in temperature or sea level could ripple through the food web like tremors. The late Cretaceous was full of local shocks, volcanic winters, regional droughts, temporary die-offs. Each time, life rebounded, plants recolonized, rivers changed their paths, herds adjusted. But these recoveries came at a cost. The margin for resilience was thinner than it appeared. The global ecosystem was a patchwork of interlocking balances, robust but stretched tight. In the sediments of the time, we can see both the strength and the strain. Layers rich in pollen and charcoal show forests burning and returning. Marine records capture fluctuations in oxygen levels that hint at brief ocean stagnations. Fossil assemblages reveal periodic local extinctions followed by new arrivals, like the changing cast of a long-running play. The Earth was experimenting, holding steady, improvising stability even as pressures built in the background. For millions of years it succeeded. The late Cretaceous world endured droughts, eruptions and shifting seas. To its inhabitants, these events must have seemed like mere seasonal inconveniences. What's striking about this final age of the dinosaurs is how complete it feels. The great ecological dramas, herbivory, predation, flight, nesting, flowering, pollination, had all reached their mature forms. Evolution had refined the Mesozoic into an intricate masterpiece. The giant reptiles, the feathered flyers, the mammals, the insects and the flowering plants all fit together like gears in a clock, each turning the others. Nothing about this world feels transitional. It was not winding down. It was humming, confident, and whole. And perhaps that's what makes its ending so poignant. The late Cretaceous world was not dying. It was thriving. The forests were green, the rivers wide, the skies filled with wings. Dinosaurs were not fading away. They were at their peak. But stability can be deceptive. Like a calm sea before a storm, the Mesozoic seemed eternal right up until the moment it wasn't. The planet had built a masterpiece of balance, but all it took was one disruption, one cosmic stone cast into its calm surface to send ripples that no ecosystem could absorb. For now, though, in these final moments before the fall, the age of reptiles stood radiant beneath the sun. Flowers opened, herds grazed, and the air thrummed with the voices of insects. It was a world at peace with itself, ancient, complete, and unaware that its sunset had already begun. 66 million years ago, the age of reptiles ended not with a slow fade, but with a single impossible moment. It began as an ordinary day in the late Cretaceous, a world humming with life, sunlight glittering over rivers, and herds grazing among flowering plants. Then, somewhere over what is now the Gulf of Mexico, a rock the size of a mountain arrived at cosmic speed. The asteroid struck near the shallow waters of the Yucatan Peninsula, and in that instant the story of life on Earth changed forever. The impact at Chicxulub released energy equivalent to billions of atomic bombs. In less than a heartbeat, the air itself turned to fire. A blinding flash raced across the horizon as shockwaves rippled through rock and ocean alike. The ground rolled like a living thing, sending tsunamis higher than skyscrapers racing across coastlines. A wall of vaporized stone, dust, and molten glass rose into the sky and spread outward in a widening curtain. Where the atmosphere met the heavens, fragments of the planet's own crust were hurled into orbit before falling back as a fiery rain. Forests ignited on contact. Every continent saw its skies glow red, then darken. In the immediate aftermath, the world burned. Vast regions were set alight by the returning ejector, molten debris re-entering the atmosphere and igniting global wildfires. The smoke and ash combined with pulverized rock to form a shroud around the Earth. Daylight vanished. Within hours, the planet entered what scientists call an impact winter, a global night that would last for months. Temperatures plummeted, photosynthesis halted, and the intricate web of life that had taken millions of years to build began to unravel. At first, the destruction seemed total. Plants withered without sunlight. Plankton in the oceans died off. The food web collapsed from the bottom upward. Herbivores starved, and with them went the predators that depended on them. The once vibrant plains of the late Cretaceous became silent fields of ash. Even the oceans, which had survived countless past upheavals, turned toxic as acidified rain and sediment choked their shallows. Coral reefs crumbled, and the great marine reptiles disappeared into extinction. On land, the thunder of the dinosaurs fell quiet. Yet not everything vanished. In the chaos, certain creatures endured, some through physiology, some through behavior, and some through pure chance. Crocodilians survived by doing what they had always done best: waiting. Their slow metabolisms allowed them to endure long stretches without food, and their semi-aquatic lifestyles shielded them from the worst of the fires and heat. Buried in rivers and swamps, they rode out the darkness as the world above froze and burned. Small mammals, too, endured the storm. Their burrows became lifeboats, protecting them from falling debris and temperature swings. Their omnivorous diets let them eat seeds, roots, and carrion when fresh vegetation was gone. Warm-blooded and quick-breeding, they could recover faster than the great reptiles ever could. Birds, the last living dinosaurs, also made it through, though not without loss. Those capable of flight found refuge far from disaster zones, while others may have survived by feeding on seeds that lay dormant underground. They were few, battered, and scattered, but they endured. The first weeks after the impact were chaos. The Earth's surface temperature dropped dramatically, and acid rain scoured the land. Photosynthesis stalled almost everywhere, cutting off the energy source for nearly all ecosystems. It wasn't just large creatures that vanished, even the microscopic foundations of life suffered. The ocean's plankton, which supported entire marine food chains, nearly disappeared. Yet, in the slow passing of months, the dust began to settle. The atmosphere cleared. The long night gave way to a weak, uncertain dawn. Recovery began in the smallest things. In the fossil record, one of the first signs of renewal is what scientists call a fern spike. Ferns, among the most resilient plants on Earth, thrive in disturbed environments. Their spores spread easily, and they can grow where others cannot. In the ash beds that blanket the post-impact world, fern spores appear in sudden abundance, a green veil returning to a grey planet. They pave the way for other plants. Grasses, shrubs, and eventually forests. The first animals to repopulate these landscapes were the opportunists, scavengers, seed-eaters, burrowers. Slowly, ecosystems rebuilt themselves from the ground up. The choreography of recovery was delicate and uneven. In some regions, it took mere decades for vegetation to reappear. In others, it took centuries. Oceans recovered more slowly, their chemistry needing thousands of years to stabilize. The early Paleogene world was one of transition, a quieter, emptier Earth, filled with small mammals and birds exploring niches left vacant by the dinosaurs. Evolution, as always, wasted no time. With new opportunities came innovation. Within a few million years, mammals began to diversify, some growing larger, some taking to the trees, others returning to the sea. The age of reptiles was over, but life had already begun sketching its next act. Even the crater itself, hidden beneath layers of limestone and sea, became a cradle of renewal. Over the millennia, corals colonized its rim, turning the scar of impact into a reef. The Earth, patient as always, repurposed destruction into habitat. What began as violence ended as beauty. The survivors of that cataclysm share traits that, in hindsight, tell a clear story. Small body size, flexible diet, shelter-seeking behavior, and physiological adaptability were the keys to endurance. The giants that had ruled through stability fell when the balance shattered. But the small, the quiet, and the resourceful, those who could hide, eat anything and wait, became the architects of the new world. It's a recurring theme in evolution. Resilience rarely wears a crown. Yet extinction, though brutal, was not absolute. One branch of dinosaurs bent without breaking. The birds that flutter outside our windows today are direct descendants of those ancient survivors. Their bones, lungs, and feathers are the same designs that once graced the skies above the Cretaceous plains. Every chirp is a small, defiant echo of a world that nearly ended. The line between past and present, it seems, was never severed, just thinned. Looking back on that moment, it's tempting to see only tragedy. But the asteroid that ended one age also cleared the way for another. Without it, mammals might never have risen to dominance, and the line that led to humans might never have taken shape. The end of the dinosaurs was not the end of life, but a dramatic pause between verses. It was extinction as punctuation. A full stop that allowed the next sentence of evolution to begin. There's humility in that story. It reminds us that even the most powerful creatures are bound by the same rules as the smallest. Stability is temporary, and change is the only constant. The Earth, though battered, is endlessly patient. It rebuilds, reimagines, and moves forward, whether we are ready or not. The day the sky fell was both an ending and a beginning, a single, terrible heartbeat in which life was broken and then renewed. Out of that darkness came songbirds, forests, and eventually thought itself. It's a testament to the planet's long endurance that from the ashes of extinction rose new worlds, new sounds, and new eyes to look back across time and wonder how it all survived. The story of the Age of Reptiles is not a simple rise and fall, but a long and intricate conversation between the Earth and everything that lived upon it. Over the span of nearly 180 million years, continents drifted apart like slow-moving rafts, climates breathed in rhythms of warmth and rain, and life responded with infinite creativity. The Mesozoic world was never static. It was a continuous improvisation between land, sea, air, and the living patterns that tied them together. From the first reptiles that dared to stretch their limbs into new environments, to the birds that still greet the sunrise, it was all part of one great experiment: how to live on a restless planet. Each chapter of that experiment left traces, bones in stone, tracks in mud, pollen in ancient dust. The Triassic opened with rebuilding, life finding footholds after extinction. The Jurassic unfolded in warmth and abundance, filling the world with long-necked grazers and winged wanderers. The Cretaceous sang the final verse, a world of flowers and colour, of complex ecosystems fine-tuned by evolution's patient hand. When we look back across those millions of years, we see not chaos but structure, an underlying order shaped by chance and persistence alike. The continents moved, but life always followed. Deserts burned, seas returned, forests grew, and life rewrote itself to fit each new stage. Extinctions, though devastating, acted like edits in this ongoing manuscript. They pruned excess, reshaped the cast, and left room for new ideas to flourish. Evolution, ever the composer, built harmonies from what remained. The great die-offs were punctuation marks in the planet's story, not the end of the book. And between them, life composed symphonies of form and function, the glide of a pterosaur, the swing of a sauropod's neck, the iridescent shimmer of a feather-catching Cretaceous sunlight. The collaboration of chaos and order is what defines the Mesozoic. Catastrophe and creation intertwined, each shaping the other as weather kept time. The climates of that world were vast and varied. Warmth ruled, but it was not uniform. There were monsoons and droughts, deep inland seas and polar forests that never saw frost. The atmosphere was thicker, the oxygen richer, and the winds strong enough to sculpt dunes and spread life across continents. Volcanoes breathed carbon into the sky. Plants drank it in and gave back oxygen and shade. Even the smallest changes in sunlight or rainfall could ripple through entire ecosystems. Yet through all of it, the Earth never ceased its conversation with life. Every storm, every eruption, every quiet dawn was part of the same grand dialogue. In that sense, the dinosaurs and their kin were not rulers of the planet. They were participants in its rhythm. The real sovereign of the Mesozoic, if we're being honest, was the wind. It carried spores, shaped migration paths, filled the wings of pterosaurs and whispered through the forests of cycads and conifers. It spread the fires after impact and cooled the nights that followed. The creatures we remember, the towering predators, the gentle giants, the hidden mammals, were all part of that wind-driven world, responding to patterns far older and larger than themselves. And though the Mesozoic ended, its echoes never faded. Birds still trace the same skies that pterosaurs once crossed. Reptiles still bask in the sun, their blood warming to the same rhythms as their ancestors. Mammals, once confined to burrows and shadows, still carry the instincts honed in those long nights beneath the feet of giants. Even the flowers around us are the descendants of that great evolutionary gamble that began in the Cretaceous, bright reminders of resilience and quiet innovation. To live today is to walk among survivors of the Mesozoic's patient work. Every garden, every forest, every breath of air is a continuation of its legacy. What the Age of Reptiles leaves us beyond fossils and fascination is perspective. Its scale softens our own small anxieties. When you think in millions of years, worry becomes weather, passing, reshaping, and forgotten by the next season. Continents move, species rise and fall, and still the planet continues its patient breathing. The same processes that built the world of the dinosaurs are still at work now. Tectonic plates shifting, climates oscillating, evolution experimenting in quiet corners. The story hasn't ended, it's just turned another page. There's something comforting in that. The Mesozoic reminds us that change is not something to fear, but something to understand. The Earth has endured far worse and rebuilt itself in astonishing ways. From extinction came renewal, from fire came forests, and from ash came feathers. The deep past offers a kind of calm that's hard to find elsewhere, a reassurance that time, though merciless, is also generous. It teaches patience, humility, and wonder. So tonight, as you drift towards sleep, imagine the world as it once was, the hiss of warm rain on ferns, the low thunder of distant footsteps, the flicker of fireflies over primeval swamps. Picture inland seas glowing under a moon untouched by cities, and forests swaying in the breath of a planet still young at heart. The creatures are gone, but their patterns remain, in the wind, the waves, and the rhythm of life itself. The Age of Reptiles was never just about dominance, it was about endurance. It showed how life could take any shape, fill any niche, and recover from anything. Its memory lingers not in fossils alone, but in the quiet persistence of the natural world around us. And if you listen closely, to the dawn chorus of birds, to the hum of insect at dusk, to your own heartbeat echoing in the night, you can still hear the faint rhythm of the Mesozoic continuing on. So rest easy, knowing that the world has weathered worse and always found its balance again. The Earth is old, wise, and endlessly inventive. The stories it tells are not warnings, but lullabies, songs of survival written in stone and sky. The dinosaurs may be gone, but their lesson remains, that even in endings there is beauty, and in every quiet breath the promise of beginning again.